Chapter 8:13. Liszt did not participate in the construction of the Tinder planes. He and Achi studied the vortex hole for an entire day, but there were no abnormalities here before the transmigration. Even when Achi released super magic to communicate with the magic net, there was no wormhole space that tore the magic net apart even though the magic net appeared. Achi gave a relatively reasonable explanation. The magic net could not be deduced with common sense, and there was no such thing as physical distance. Liszt concluded. If the world he was in could be described as three-dimensional, then the magic net was an existence that surpassed three-dimensional. Just like how two-dimensional could not explain three-dimensional, three-dimensional could not explain the existence above three-dimensional. Therefore, the magic net that Achi communicated with and the magic net that the teleportation formation tore apart were only a part of the magic net and not the whole of the magic net. In short, it was such a mysterious logic. We have to pass through the vortex many times and figure out every detail of the teleportation formation bit by bit, Achi said. Then let's go and map the Flame Archipelago. After instructing Claus and the rest to continue the construction of the Tinder planes, Liszt rode on the little fire dragon Leo and flew north with Achi in his arms. The vortex mountain was deep in the eastern part of Flame Island. Because the island was irregular, it was more than 500 kilometers away from the northern coast. They started flying in the afternoon, maintaining an altitude of more than 1,000 meters along the way while observing the terrain of Flame Island. From the flight path, Flame Island had undulating mountains and varied terrain. They also saw a few volcanoes emitting white smoke. However, Leo flew over excitedly, only to find that these volcanoes were dormant. There was no exposed magma for him to enter and absorb volcano supreme magic. Furthermore, Liszt also used the Dragon Eye path to observe the signs of magic below. He found that there were many lights of mana retroaction. There were World of Warcraft potions and even elves. However, he only remembered the locations of the lights and did not descend to collect them. Anyway, Flame Island was his territory and everything was his. He could come and collect them whenever he wanted. Only the surrounding islands were land that he was prepared to give away. These large islands that were close to Ironhoof Island were enough to confer a dozen marquises. Furthermore, Achi had only circled around the Flame Archipelago and had not searched further out. He did not know if there were any new islands. Even if he didn't, it didn't matter. The second archipelago, the one he had just named the Maelstrom Archipelago, could easily confer 2 or 3 more marquises to him. With the Great Maelstrom's teleportation array, communication would be quite tight. In the evening, arriving at the coast, Leo returned to his body, and Achi began to act as the pilot. Riding on the shell and the waterspout, he was like a flickering light that streaked across the sea. This time she swam along the coastline. Every time she swam a certain distance, she would take out the sextant to measure her position, record the specific location of each direction in the notebook, and finally connect these directions into a line. This line will outline the outline and area of Flame Island. Surveying and mapping was a little time-consuming, especially since the weather on Blazing Island seemed to be very changeable. It was still sunny here, but it was already raining there, so it was not good to use the sextant to calculate the position directly. He could only use other methods to ponder over it bit by bit, or wait for the weather to clear up before making the calculations. Luckily, they had sunk into the tedious task of mapping the map, and the magic platform communication was able to facilitate Liszt's plans for the production and construction of his territory. Cross Buckthorn and the others were constantly building the Infernal Plains camp on Flame Island, while Kenley Truth and the others were constantly building the Whirlpool Town camp on Whirlpool Island. The expedition fleet led by Yevich had already set off with 2 other expedition fleets to the Flame Islands, ready to explore the surrounding waters with the Flame Islands as the center, reducing Achi's mapping work. On the Heart Island, the night was still hard at work mining. On the Ironhoof City side, serfs were constantly purchased through the Marquis of Oxtail, and after training they were sent to Black Horse Island. The officials of Black Horse Island, in accordance with Liszt's instructions in the magic platform communication, continued to build large frame ships like the Flame, and prepared various materials, which were sealed with thorny wood and rubber water. If it was not to prevent the materials from being crushed by the whirlpool, some broken ships could be used to transport them. Anyway, Achi would catch these large ships at the entrance of the whirlpool with a waterspout. The role of archmages in large projects was much stronger than that of the Dragon Knight, who could only charge and fight. Perhaps this was the reason why the Moon Empire was able to develop a brilliant civilization. Now, after the Knight ruled the world, it had become an ignorant, backward, half-slave and half-feudal system. Unfortunately, it was difficult for Achi to maintain so much workload by herself, and she could not take care of both sides. She could protect the exit of the whirlpool, but she could not stabilize the entrance of the whirlpool. The powerful strangulation force of the whirlpool was very strong. It was difficult for ordinary boxes and ships to resist, so they could only be constantly reinforced. After all, the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, which lacked iron, built all wooden ships. A week passed in the blink of an eye. A chief finally completed all the maps of the islands around the Flame Islands. The results were gratifying, especially the area of the Flame Islands, which made it difficult for List to calm down for a long time. It was a huge amount of 3 million square kilometers, nearly one-third the area of China. The largest island on Earth was Greenland with an area of 2.16 million square kilometers, and the Flame Island was one-third larger than it. In addition, there were 8 large islands with an area of more than 100,000 square kilometers, including 3 in the northeast corner of the archipelago and 4 in the Southwest Sea. The last one was discovered by the exploration team. About 1,000 kilometers away in the Southeast Sea of the archipelago, there were countless islands with an area of less than 100,000 square kilometers. During this week, Achi was busy mapping and List was on the side naming the islands. The big islands under the jurisdiction of the Flame Islands were. The map had been uploaded to White's public account, which could be found by searching for by Yuhan. After following, some writing materials would be released from time to time. The first big island, the Flame Island, was located in the center of the archipelago, with an area of 3 million square kilometers. The second big island, the Tulip Island, was located in the south of the archipelago, and was one of the 4 big islands in the southwest, with an area of 450,000 square kilometers. List had decided to infect this island to the Tulip family, just like how the first Sapphire Grand Duke infected the Ironhoof Island with an area of 300,000 square kilometers to the Bull family. The third big island, the Algae Island, was located in the northeast of the archipelago, and was one of the 3 big islands in the northeast, with an area of 280,000 square kilometers. The fourth big island, the Jingji Island, was located in the southwest of the archipelago, and was one of the 4 big islands in the southwest, with an area of 270,000 square kilometers. The fifth big island, the Mangrove Island, was located in the northeast of the archipelago, and was one of the 3 big islands in the northeast, with an area of 230,000 square kilometers. The sixth big island, the Jewel Island, was located in the west of the archipelago, and was one of the 4 big islands in the southwest, with an area of 220,000 square kilometers. The seventh big island, the Wutong Island, was located in the northeast of the archipelago, and was one of the 3 big islands in the northeast, with an area of 170,000 square kilometers. The eighth big island, the P Island, was located in the southwest of the archipelago, and was one of the 4 big islands in the southwest, with an area of 150,000 square kilometers. The ninth big island, the Anchor Island, was located in the depths of the Southeast Sea of the archipelago, and was connected by a string of small islands, like an anchor thrown out by a big ship, hence the name, with an area of 100,000 square kilometers. The total area of the 9 big islands was 4.87 million square kilometers. Together with other large and small islands, the total area was more than 5.3 million square kilometers. If the Whirlpool Islands, the Midway Island, the First Island, the Dragon Turtle Island, the 3 islands and other islands were included, the total area was more than 5 million square kilometers. The total area of all the islands in the Grand Duchy of Sapphire added up was only about 2 million square kilometers. With such an area, if there are a lot of mines on the island and a few more resource dragons are raised, it will be enough to be self-sufficient, and there will be no need to issue a development order every year like Sapphire. In fact, as long as I ride the invisible dragon, together with the light green gem dragon that has recovered, I will be able to be self-sufficient in a few years. Thinking of this, he summoned the smoke mission. Chapter 8:14. The invisible dragon was an old friend. It really got lost, otherwise it would have waited until the end of June to attend the banquet. The smoke grass List prepared was almost dried into hay, but where did the invisible dragon get lost? This was a brain-racking question. After leaving the Flame Islands, List used the magic eyes almost every day, trying to meet the invisible dragon on the way back to Black Horse Island. Unfortunately, he did not encounter the invisible dragon on the way back to Black Horse Island. He then ran to the dragon's table near Green Tea Town and lit the smoke grass. The stench made the nearby serfs nauseous, but the invisible dragon did not show up. It did not seem to be lost near Black Horse Island. Thus, List hurried to the flower town and continued to light the smoke grass. There was no doubt that it was useless except for disgusting people. Where did the invisible dragon get lost? List was puzzled and could only put aside this headless search for the time being and return to normal work. According to the consistent nature of smoke missions, most of the rewards did not need to be deliberately looked for. They would naturally be driven by the power of fate and come to him at his fingertips. Perhaps the invisible dragon was waiting on his way, waiting for List to engrave an imprint on its mind. So, let's get busy with the construction of Inferno Town first. List calmed his anxiety. Inferno Town was the next stage of the Inferno Plain camp. This was the content of the new mission. Now that the distribution of the Flame Islands has been mapped, the next step is to start territorial relocation, systematically transfer the industry and population of the Flame territory, and carry out the large-scale development of the Flame Islands. Please build the Inferno Plain camp into Inferno Town. Reward, new schooner. The seat reward for the new schooner was probably perfunctory, because the earliest shipyard of Black Horse Island had been studying the longitudinal sail technology provided by List. He proposed the idea, but the specific production and operation needed to be realized little by the shipwrights. After more than a year of development, the research was about to be successful. Your Highness, all the frame ships are ready. The goods are loaded into the cabin after being heavily reinforced. Safety ropes woven from hemp ropes have been produced in large quantities, enough to ensure that the migrating serfs and craftsmen are firmly tied to the cabin and will not be thrown out. Isaiah came to report. Go and check the frame ship again. I don't want anything to go wrong. Any small mistake could lead to the destruction of the ship and the loss of lives. As you wish, Your Highness. Isaiah bowed and excused himself. Then he went to check again. This time, a total of 10 large frame ships were arranged across the whirlpool. It was the masterpiece of tens of thousands of shipbuilders working day and night on Black Horse Island. 5 of the large frame ships were filled with all kinds of materials, including daily necessities and construction materials. Just rubber alone took up half of the ship. It had to be said that ever since the rubber worm triplets evolved into 3 rubber fairies, Big White, Little White, they were able to use the power of the 3 elements to repair the rubber tree under List's guidance. Therefore, the production of rubber in the territory skyrocketed, and there was a lot of inventory. This time they were all taken away by List. He was going to build up the infernal plains. Apart from resources, there was also population. Farming serfs were indispensable. They couldn't rely on hunting and fishing all day, it was too extravagant to rely on the great maelstrom to transport food. The construction of Infernal Town was inseparable from craftsmen, so a large number of carpenters, stonemasons and architects, led by Jemiah Rammed Earth, were needed. Knight were also essential personnel to protect the safety of the Infernal Plains area at all times. At present there was only one holy swordsman, Cross Buckthorn, who had not yet been titled in the camp. Once he explored the surrounding environment, the camp could only rely on the protection of a dozen Earth Knights. Philip, go and call Count Duarte. Yes, Your Highness. Philip rode away from the Castle of Thorns at once. He had followed List for so many years, but he was still a retainer knight on paper because his strength stayed at the trainee knight level. List's first batch of selected retainer knights were basically the descendants of Flower Town's local serfs. They had mediocre qualifications. If they wanted to be promoted to an Earth Knight, they needed to continue to endure. However, there were exceptions. Xavier Cowdung, who was in the same batch as Philip, was not necessarily better than Philip, but because of his good flattery, he had been promoted to Black Horse Island's diplomatic assistant, working under Zambrata. And with the infusion of resources from List, he was promoted to an Earth Knight. His secret work was to cooperate with the Blood Servants to spy on intelligence and master the rats to mix into various forces. He was another eye for List. Soon Duarte Red Apricot arrived. Your Highness, what can I do for you? I want to develop the Flame Islands and need to send a team of orders of chivalry to ensure the safety of the construction workers. It just so happens that you have nothing to do, so I decided to give this task to you. List said. Duarte's eyes lit up and he said excitedly, I am willing to share the burden of Your Highness. Very well, but I won't give you elite knights. You can go to Ironhoof City and recruit those inferior knights yourself. However, you have to keep it a secret. For the time being, you can't tell anyone about the Flame Islands. Since Flame Island was so big, it was easy to imagine how dangerous it was in the desolate forest. Elite knights should not die in the forest, so it was better to recruit those unqualified knights to die. If they were lucky enough to survive until the founding of the country, they would be given wealth and glory. Understood. I will give you a month. Commander Garcia, who is stationed in Ironhoof City, will cooperate with you. The Knight of the Tulip family will also cooperate with you. Yes. After Duarte left in a hurry, Liszt asked Philip to call someone again. Call Emily. Emily was still an elite Earth Knight. She killed many Knight in the Battle of the Sea, but she was not promoted to a Sky Knight. Compared to Liszt, who was promoted from an Earth Knight to a Sky Knight in half a year, Emily's superhuman talent was obviously inferior. Your Highness. The girl walked into the castle. How is your training? There is no war, so the progress is slow. Emily told the truth. In that case, I will arrange for you to go to the Flame Island. There are a lot of World of Warcraft lurking in the forest there. Liszt said, bring Dosen and the Blizzard team to help Firetown make rocks. Dosen does not need to be responsible for producing rocks. Let it protect you. Your Highness, Emily can protect herself. Liszt looked at the tall girl with a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth. It protects you and you have to protect it too. Dosen is my earliest close combat partner, and I don't want anything to happen to it. Emily, I will leave Dosen to you. You should be able to understand my expectations of you. Emily's face flashed a little red, and then she said sternly, please rest assured, Your Highness, Emily will never let Your Highness down. Very well, go take the Blizzard team to adapt to the cabin of the frame ship, and make sure that they are disciplined during the voyage. Liszt watched the girl's back as she left and slowly closed his eyes. Chapter 8:15. There was another Orders of Chivalry that followed the fleet to Flame Island. It was the Orders of Chivalry from Black Horse Island led by Fox. The task of this Orders of Chivalry was not to explore the forest, but to protect the Infernal Plains and the mages stationed in the Infernal Plains. The Guild of Magic was preparing to open a branch of the Guild of Magic in the Infernal Plains. In the future, mages would move to the Infernal Plains and follow the Orders of Chivalry to explore the broad forest. Liszt had gradually transformed these mages into experts and scholars, letting them fight for scientific research for a lifetime. As for the mages going to the Infernal Plains, they were selected for mages with questionable loyalty. With the isolation of Flame Island, once these mages arrived at the Infernal Plains, they would be isolated from the world. Even if they were part-time rats in other countries, they would still have to work for Liszt. A few years later, the road between Flame Island and the outside world would be opened, and they would probably be labeled as the Nation of Fire. June 22nd. The weather was fine on Black Horse Island. The blazing flame took the vanguard, followed by 10 large frame ships as they set out in a majestic manner. Liszt stood at the bow of the ship and looked at Achi, who was sitting upright and not burying her head in her book. He asked with concern, Achi, can you hold on controlling 11 ships? Achi nodded, it's a little difficult, but if we reduce the speed to 300 kilometers per hour, we can save some effort. The sailing distance from Black Horse Island to the Maelstrom was 4,200 kilometers. At a speed of 300 kilometers per hour, it would take 14 hours, plus the rest time halfway, to arrive in one day. Then slow down, don't tire yourself out. So the fleet moved towards the Maelstrom at a speed of 300 kilometers per hour. On the way, they stopped at the Red Tree Town Camp on one of the 3 islands, the Crescent Island Crescent Town Camp on the first island, and the Green Light Town Camp on the Midway Island. One was to let the knight and civilians go ashore to relieve seasickness and other conditions. The second was to send food, jade, and potions to the Light Green Gem Dragon. The Light Green Gem Dragon Isin lived a happy life on the Midway Island. There were many World of Warcraft on the island and it could hunt at will. Liszt would send it the jade and potion resources it lacked. His body had almost recovered. Later on, Liszt would mount it himself and fly toward the Great Maelstrom. There he would pass through the teleportation array and enter Flame Island. When the time came, he would find a suitable place to build a dragon nest and let the light green gemstone dragon slowly produce light green gemstones. The market for gemstones was always in short supply, so there was no need to worry about not being able to sell. All kinds of magical equipment and divine weapons required gems as raw materials. This was why the price of gems was so high. After a friendly chat with Ethan, Liszt returned to the fleet. He set off immediately and arrived at the Swirling Islands in an hour and a half. He then docked at Whirlpool Town on the Whirlpool Island. Vortex Town was still in its infancy, and the magic lab was very simple. Liszt held a group meeting here, and the main content of the meeting was the material acceptance plan for the next day. After Achi passed through the Great Maelstrom, the 10 frame ships had to undergo manual navigation and slowly sail into the Great Maelstrom. The timing had to be precise so that Achi could be prepared in time to catch the ship with the waterspout and prevent the ship from rushing out of the whirlpool and crashing. After everything was settled, The next morning, the fleet set off again and docked near the Great Maelstrom. Before transmigrating, Achi had to conduct a new experiment, the rope experiment. This experiment was to find out whether the wormhole space connected to the Great Maelstrom existed in reality or not, and how the distance of the wormhole space connected to an area thousands of kilometers away. Leo was holding on to a rope as thick as a wrist made of hemp vines. A huge rock was tied to one end to accelerate the fall of the rope. List and Achi rode the dragon together and slowly flew above the Great Maelstrom. Right above the whirlpool well, he suddenly threw the big rock tied to the rope into the well. The rock fell rapidly and the rope was pulled round and round. When the rock fell into the depths of the watery whirlpool, a ball of light quickly swallowed the rock in the vision of the dragon's eye. Then, a huge pulling force came from the rope that Leo was pulling. Leo's body was directly pulled down and spun. And one end of the rope was difficult to hold, so it was quickly pulled and thrown into the deep whirlpool well. Everything happened in a flash and it was almost impossible to see with the naked eye. "Steady yourself, Leo." List and Leo's hearts were one, and they frantically flapped their wings. Only then did they manage to stabilize their body at the entrance of the whirlpool well and fly up again. "Big brother," Achi called out nervously. "It's fine, the strength of the rope is beyond imagination." "Leo's strength is also not enough to hold on to the rope," List said with some relief. The thick rope made of hemp vines was a super cable that even Leo couldn't pull. Luckily, it wasn't directly tied to Leo's leg, or else he would definitely be pulled into the Great Maelstrom. "Is it caused by the repulsive force in the wormhole space?" "I don't know." List shook his head. He really didn't know where this force came from. Achi thoughtfully took out the devil platform and waited for a moment. Then she contacted the devil platform in the infernal plains. There was a quick response. The big rock used for the experiment had already fallen, and behind it was a 100-meter-long cable. Achi analyzed. There are two possibilities. One is that the wormhole space is a real existence, and its internal repulsive force caused a force that even Leo couldn't hold on to. The other is that the wormhole space is a non-real existence, or it could be said that the space was compressed, causing the cable to move quickly, causing Leo to be unable to hold on. List looked into the distance and nodded. "Makes sense. Big brother, let's transmigrate too." Achi can't wait to verify her idea and observe the details of the magic teleportation array again. "Okay." With a thought, Leo immediately folded his wings and fell into the deep whirlpool well like a meteor. Rumble. He was already in the wormhole space. In the vision of the Dragon Eye orbit, the densely packed spider web-like magic power lines outlined the zigzagging space tunnel. Around the tunnel, the magic net was faintly discernible. Once again he transmigrated. This should be the masterpiece of the ancient magic shooters. List was still deeply shocked. The endless magic net wrapping and the drilling of the magic net were a strong visual impact. But unlike the first time, this time Achi transmigrated with him. Her eye of magic level couldn't compare to the Dragon Eye orbit, so she had to ask List for many details. Chapter 8:16. The second transmigration brought him a lot of new knowledge. After a little preparation, List got Achi to contact the fleet near the Great Maelstrom with the magic platform and began to row the frame ship toward the Great Maelstrom. When they entered the range of the Great Maelstrom, there was no need to row anymore. The frame ship filled with cargo turned automatically in the Great Maelstrom. The rotation lasted for half an hour before it finally fell into the deep well of the Great Maelstrom. The mages who were observing from afar immediately transmitted the information to Achi. Achi waved her hand at the entrance of the Great Maelstrom and set up a waterspout. A moment later, the frame ship appeared with a roar and crashed into the waterspout. Boom. The waterspout was almost smashed into pieces. However, Achi raised her eyebrows and shouted, "Ja!" The shattered waterspout closed up again, holding the frame ship back until it stabilized. Then she gently placed it on the mountain platform that she had made with her super magic, chainsaw-type high-pressure water knife. The ship landed. Cross and the other knight who had been waiting there for a long time began to unload the cargo. On the other side, a new frame ship set off for the Great Maelstrom again. This time the ship was filled with knight, serfs, and craftsmen. Half an hour later, the ship rushed out of the Great Maelstrom again and was caught by Achi. "It's safe. Let the other side drive the remaining 8 frame ships into the Great Maelstrom one after another to save time." Seeing that Achi had caught it steadily, List immediately heaved a sigh of relief. This method of transporting supplies was indeed feasible. However, what List didn't know was that, in the Great Maelstrom, as 2 frame ships passed through, a gaze suddenly lit up in the mysterious area where space and the magic net intersected. It was a dragon with a faintly discernible body that looked like crystal but also like transparent flowing water. It was as happy as if it had discovered a new continent. It flapped its wings and tried to fly into the great maelstrom. However, although it seemed to be flying at high speed for some unknown reason, it didn't seem to fly very far. Boom. As the frame ship rushed out of the great maelstrom, its gaze turned blank as if it had suddenly lost track of the great maelstrom. Wuxia! It roared loudly. There was no response. The surroundings were pitch black and there was nothing. And in its own field of vision, there were countless flowing crystal-like substances that filled the world. These identical crystal-like substances made it lose its sense of direction, and it didn't know where it was going. At this moment, the crystal-like substance in the distance suddenly lit up, and another frame ship activated the wormhole space of the magic teleportation circle. The transparent dragon was overjoyed as if it was reunited after a long time. It flapped its wings and slowly seeped into the stacked crystal-like substance like a stream of water. He quickly flew towards the location of the light. A moment later the light went out and it lost its direction again. But soon the spot continued to light up. After a few more times the dragon finally arrived at the lit spot. Just like that, its body quietly drilled through the crystalline wall and entered the wormhole. Seeing the large frame ship flying rapidly in front of it, it followed closely behind it and flew towards the end of the tunnel. Third ship steady. Fourth ship steady. Eighth ship steady. List watched Chi catch the big frame ships one by one and put them aside, silently counting. The knight, serfs and craftsmen disembarked from the ship and began to unload the supplies on the ship. Then he assembled many wheelbarrows and loaded the resources onto them. He then pushed the wheelbarrows towards the infernal plains. The mighty team added a lot of civilized atmosphere to the desolate forest. Rumble. The ninth frame ship flew out of the vortex hole. Chi had already skillfully caught the ship and placed it on the platform. Riding Leo, List was bored supervising the order of the scene. At the same time he used Dragon Eye Track to observe the operation of magic power at the entrance of the vortex hole for the umpteenth time. Just as he was about to disperse Dragon Eye Track and rest for a moment, a dragon-shaped magic power suddenly flew out of the hole. This magic power dragon had a slender body and graceful movements. It didn't have the slightest trace of embarrassment from being pushed out of the wormhole space. It was as if it was leisurely strolling in a courtyard. Almost as soon as he saw the dragon's magic power body, the words "old friend" emerged in List's mind. The invisible dragon. It's the invisible dragon. His mind was a bit muddled. Just a moment ago he was worried about where the invisible dragon had gotten lost, thinking that fate would bring it to his side. He didn't expect that the invisible dragon would actually come to his side. It was too sudden and unexpected, leaving him at a loss as to what to do. Leo, who was in mind and soul as one, was similarly stunned. However, the invisible dragon also discovered the situation at the entrance of the cave. It saw the dragon knight List the Flame riding the fire dragon flaunting its prowess. It quickly remembered that this was the insignificant human that it had eaten a feast and paid 3 space gems for the meal. Wuxia. The invisible dragon twisted its head and circled around before shouting at List. Its firebird spread out from the entrance of the cave. The knight, serfs and craftsmen who were busy unloading the goods suddenly felt as if their throats were being strangled. They had difficulty breathing and simply lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Chi, who had put down the frame ship, also felt the firebird's firebird and then heard the sharp cry. She quickly cast the super magic eye, clearly seeing the invisible dragon's figure, confronting List and Yao Yao who were riding the fire dragon. Roar! How could Leo tolerate another dragon showing off in front of him? He roared and was about to rush over. Fortunately, List's thoughts were in the dominant position, suppressing Leo's thoughts. Suppressing Leo's anger and the shock of the invisible dragon's sudden appearance, List quickly calmed down. He didn't know why the invisible dragon rushed out of the magic transmission array, but this was no longer important. What was important was to seize this opportunity and capture the invisible dragon. Thereupon he pondered for a moment. He took out a bundle of smoke grass from his space ring and swayed it. Then he urged Leo to slowly fly to the back of the vortex mountain. He wanted to find a place where he wouldn't be disturbed and slowly subdue the invisible dragon. He saw the familiar smoke grass. The invisible dragon, whose eyes were shining, cleverly flew after List. After arriving at an open space halfway up the mountain, List and Leo landed on the open space. The invisible dragon circled twice and also landed on the other side of the open space. Because he had seen the invisible dragon's friendly behavior last time, List boldly picked up the bundle of smoke grass and slowly walked toward the invisible dragon. Wuxia. The two dragons roared respectively. Leo, don't be impatient. List waved his hand at the small fire dragon behind him and then looked at the invisible dragon. We are old friends. This is smoke grass, your favorite smoke grass. Although the smell of smoke grass was unpleasant, List still went all out in order to ride the dragon. He placed the smoke grass 20 meters in front of the invisible dragon and slowly retreated 20 meters away. The invisible dragon looked at Leo and then looked at List. Seemingly aware that Leo was just a young fire dragon, it let out a slight "wea" disdainfully, walked to the front of the smoke grass, opened its mouth, bit the smoke grass and slowly chewed it. It ate very little of the smoke grass, mainly for the smell of the smoke grass. Immediately, a stench swept across. Chapter 8:17. However, the dragon was chosen by him. Even with tears in his eyes, he had to ride it. However, Leo retched on the spot. Then, regardless of List's obstruction, he turned into a ball of flame and plunged into List's body, leaving List to face the invisible dragon alone. Wuxia. The invisible dragon sniffed the smell released by the chewed smoke grass. Like a heavy smoker inhaling a mouthful of smoke, it felt as if it was ascending to immortality. Seeing this scene, List could only continue to cover his nose and carry out the next plan. He began to move the prepared food from his space ring. There was wine and beef, all prepared for the invisible dragon. Naturally, the quantity wasn't much, but small portions, slowly teasing the interest of the invisible dragon. When the invisible dragon ate the beef until its mouth was full of oil, it excitedly revealed its body and put down its guard to continue asking for meat from List. List knew that the time had come. He quietly stuffed a portion of roasted beef with the enchanting dragon spirit fruit into the invisible dragon's mouth. The invisible dragon was caught off guard and bit the roasted beef into its mouth. It's done. Upon seeing this, List was overjoyed. However, after a slight refusal, the invisible dragon opened its mouth and spat out a fruit with a 7-colored skin. It ate the beef and spat out the enchanting dragon spirit fruit hidden inside. List's eyes widened. He had never expected the invisible dragon to have such a trick. He turned his head to look at the enchanting dragon spirit fruit lying not far away and then looked at the invisible dragon that seemed to have just spat out a grain of sand and continued to enjoy the roasted beef. He didn't know whether he should silently put away the enchanting dragon spirit fruit and act as if nothing had happened, or whether he should immediately pry open the invisible dragon's mouth and stuff the enchanting dragon spirit fruit inside. The latter method was obviously not advisable. He could only silently walk over and put away the enchanting dragon spirit fruit. There were only 3 enchanting dragon spirit fruits, each of which was priceless and represented a dragon. The premise was that those dragons weren't as picky as the invisible dragon, spitting out grains of sand after eating beef. When the little fire dragon Leo ate beef, he wolfed it down. It seems that I can only harvest a few space gems this time. Shaking his head, List simply stood aside and watched the invisible dragon slowly enjoy the smoke grass feast. Then he would wait for it to finish its meal and pay the space gem as payment. Then he began to calculate what method he should use to force the invisible dragon to eat the enchanting dragon soul fruit next year when the invisible dragon came to eat again. Not far away, on top of the Whirlpool Mountain. Achi, who had already taken over the 10th frame ship, stood at the top of the mountain and secretly watched how List subdued the invisible dragon. What she saw was List's lifeless face. She covered her nose and smiled. He took a few steps back to prevent himself from being choked by the smell of the smoky grass. The invisible dragon had been lost for a long time, and its stomach was almost flattened from hunger. It was rare for it to encounter its favorite delicious meal, so it ate heartily and happily. When he was excited, he found List much more pleasing to the eye. When it finished eating the last piece of beef, it slowly walked towards List. Just as List was about to reach out and take the money for its meal, List suddenly stopped. However, it turned its head and made a gesture of raising its head. Wuxia. List didn't know what to make of it. Immediately after, the invisible dragon nudged List with its head, seemingly wanting List to ride it. This was clearly inconceivable to him. He was bent on using the enchanting dragon soul fruit to stun the invisible dragon and then forcibly ride it. Unexpectedly, after seeing through his trick, the invisible dragon took the initiative to let him ride it. Although he didn't know whether it meant this or not, List still seized the opportunity and quickly jumped up, sitting on the dragon tooth platform where the invisible dragon's neck and body connected without the slightest delay. When his buttocks were closely attached to the dragon tooth platform, He was convinced that the invisible dragon was really letting him ride it. The smoky grass feast that he had carefully prepared had already conquered the other party and obtained its approval. He could now launch a spiritual battle between man and dragon. Boom. The invisible dragon flapped its wings and flew into the sky. Liszt grabbed the scales on its neck. In a trance, the scenery of the world had changed into another appearance. All the flowers, plants, trees, mountains, and rivers had turned into crystals, some kind of irregular crystal structure. This is the world in the invisible dragon's eyes? The world in the fire dragon's eyes was particularly gorgeous and colorful, while the world in the invisible dragon's eyes was a monotonous crystal structure. Perhaps this was the most intuitive experience of the world that power brought to them. These crystal structures represent the spatial composition of matter? He pondered. But the next moment, the world suddenly underwent a tremendous change. Mountains sank, soil rose, and countless crystal structures formed a huge, endless labyrinth. Apart from the constantly repeating crystal structures, this world didn't have any other colors or shapes. Wuxia. The invisible dragon stood at the beginning of the labyrinth. Slowly stepping into the labyrinth, Liszt instantly understood how to defeat the invisible dragon's mind. He just had to walk out of this labyrinth. Not all dragons' spiritual battles were pure battles. Only evil dragons like Leo would declare victory by killing. The light green gem dragon's spiritual battle was more of a battle between Liszt and the first-generation dragon knight. The light green gem dragon itself didn't participate in it. Walk out of the labyrinth. Liszt vaguely felt a headache. This labyrinth composed of densely packed crystal structures left him at a loss. When he reached the first fork, he began to feel dizzy and fell into a dilemma. Forget it, don't think too much. First left, then right. I'll try again and again. I'll definitely find the exit. It was unknown how much time had passed in the outside world. Liszt seemed to have spent more than half a day in the spiritual battle. But apart from sweating profusely, he didn't walk out of the labyrinth. He even forgot where he was in the labyrinth. The labyrinth wasn't simply made of walls, but was similar to the dimensional killing formation. There were forks in all directions, and the crystal structure of each fork seemed to be different. It seemed to contain some kind of meaning, but he didn't know. He also couldn't remember these repeated or not repeated crystal structures. He tried to drive the invisible dragon to break through the wall, but was directly rejected by the invisible dragon. He personally pulled out the Ice Soul Dragon slaying sword and prepared to violently dismantle it, but was almost broken by the wall. The smoke wrapped around his body also didn't bring him any help. Even if he tried to mark each fork with smoke, it was still useless. The labyrinth seemed endless, leaving him in an endless loop of constantly encountering new forks or returning to the original fork. He was anxious inside. Even flustered and exasperated. Scam, it's all a scam. No one can walk out of this labyrinth. In the end, he could only watch the labyrinth collapse bit by bit. His spiritual world was about to collapse, which meant that he had already lost the spiritual battle while riding the invisible dragon. Rumble. When Liszt opened his eyes again, the world changed back to what he could see with the naked eye: blue sky, white clouds, green mountains, and clear waters. The invisible dragon was still standing in the original open space halfway up the mountain. Then it arched its neck and urged Liszt to leave its dragon-tooth platform. Since Liszt had failed to ride the invisible dragon, it no longer recognized Liszt. Hateful. Without the enchanting dragon soul fruit, he really couldn't handle the dragon. Chapter 8:18. What's going on? Looking at the invisible dragon flying into the sky, Liszt was in an extremely bad mood. He had been preparing for riding the invisible dragon for a long time. He had prepared a fine smoked grass feast and a mysterious dragon soul fruit sewn into the barbecue. He felt that this was a foolproof method. As a result, the mysterious dragon soul fruit was spat out by the invisible dragon. He thought that the plan had failed, but the invisible dragon took the initiative to seek a ride. But the battlefield of the Battle of Souls was a more complicated maze than the dimensional killing formation. He couldn't break it and couldn't use any tricks. The invisible dragon was idling in the maze. He felt that the invisible dragon was deliberately using this method to make him retreat in the face of difficulties. Don't think about it again. The densely packed and complex crystal structure, the endless forks that seemed to be constantly changing, were not for humans to break through at all. Perhaps the maze could not be entered and exited in a normal way, but the ability to travel through space was not something that Liszt could master at all. He had no choice but to be at his wits' end. He admitted that he failed to ride the dragon. The power of fate may only be able to guide but not control the invisible dragon, which was also a holy dragon. Or perhaps the invisible dragon had been reborn ahead of time and grasped its own fate. Whether it was the fire dragon or the emerald dragon, they all died early. This allowed the power of fate to take advantage of the situation. The light green gem dragon was also seriously injured before it was seized by the power of fate. Having said that, after failing to ride the dragon, the invisible dragon directly turned hostile and didn't even leave a few space gems, which was a bit too much. But just when List thought that it was going to fly away, it suddenly flew to the top of the whirlpool and rushed towards the sea monster Chi, who was watching the dragon ride. List's heart tightened. He was just about to call Chi to be careful, but he felt that the invisible dragon did not seem to have any malicious intent. Could it be that it was really too excited and dizzy? Seeing that I failed to ride the dragon, it went to find Chi to try riding it? This idea was only slightly turned around before it was directly rejected by List. It was impossible for a wizard to successfully ride a dragon. Whether it was the records of the Moon Empire or modern records, only a knight could ride a dragon. This was because Chi and dragon magic were highly compatible. Even the knight's cultivation system, if traced back to its source, was likely to be established with reference to the dragon's magic power. Therefore, when high-grade Doqi is combined with a dragon, it can quickly transform into Dragon Doqi. This was an advantage that other training systems did not have, and it was also the deciding factor for the knight to rule the world. It was impossible to break this principle because of a Chi. Therefore, it was impossible for the invisible dragon to want a Chi to ride it. It was likely that it wanted to hurt a Chi. However, he was just about to summon the little fire dragon, Leo, and then join hands with a Chi to suppress the invisible dragon. Since the invisible dragon wanted to harm a Chi, it wasn't an old friend of List. List might as well kill it and let its corpse fall on the Whirlpool Mountain, where a spatial gem mine could be nurtured. On the top of the mountain, the invisible dragon was already hovering in mid-air, facing a Chi who was standing on the top of the mountain and holding up the water wave shield. The invisible dragon did not launch an attack, and a Chi did not retreat. List quickly extinguished the thought of calling Leo, and he picked up his previous thought: does the invisible dragon really want a Chi to ride it? Such a thought arose uncontrollably. It was accompanied by a sour feeling. It was not that he was reluctant, but that he was a little psychologically unbalanced. Although it was the same whether he rode it or a Chi rode it, the feeling it brought was completely different. In order to ride the invisible dragon, the dragon had prepared for a long time, feeding List with smoke grass 3 times. Although the enchanting dragon fruit was added to the meat, it was just an interlude. Now the invisible dragon bowed its head to a siren he had never seen before, giving him a bad feeling of an honest man tries his best to pursue a girl, but the girl leaves with a tall, rich and handsome guy he has only met once. How could he build a harmonious society with such differential treatment? His inner drama was a bit too rich, probably stimulated by the failure to ride the dragon. List, who had always boasted that he was superior and had everything under control, finally realized his original ordinary face in the spiritual battle. The feeling of falling from the clouds to the mortal world was very uncomfortable. However, he successfully suppressed his increasingly inflated mentality. He took a deep breath, and suddenly burst into tears. The smell of smoke grass left in this place was really irritating to the eyes. Cough, cough. After coughing a few times, he looked up at the top of the mountain and saw that a Chi had dispersed the water wave shield. The hovering invisible dragon shouted at a Chi, "Wuxia!" A Chi shook her head. The invisible dragon shouted again, "Wuxia!" A Chi shook her head again. Then the invisible dragon angrily spewed out steam from its nostrils, turned around and swooped down the mountain, heading straight for List's position. Its speed was so fast that there was even an illusion of teleportation. In the blink of an eye, it had already landed in front of List, and its dragon eyes looked deeply at List. Huh. List, who had stopped crying, looked at the beautiful, sparkling, crystal-like invisible dragon, and doubts emerged in his mind again. He really couldn't figure out what this dragon was doing. Wuxia. The invisible dragon opened its mouth and shouted, but its meaning was unclear. However, the next moment, List had already leaped toward the invisible dragon's dragon tooth platform. No matter what kind of posture it had, he would ride it first. Going and coming back, refusing and welcoming, it definitely had the idea of begging him to ride it. As if confirming List's thoughts, the invisible dragon seemed to want to twist its body, resisting List's second ride. However, for some unknown reason, it suddenly gave up resisting, and its long and narrow face revealed a touch of human-like disgust and helplessness. In the end, it didn't dodge. It let its butt fall into the dragon tooth platform. Rumble. List rode the invisible dragon's dragon tooth platform for the second time. His spirit instantly connected with the invisible dragon, and he drove it to fly into the sky. The world changed into a crystal structure. Soon, the mountain began to sink, the earth began to bulge, and a new maze was about to rise. List pulled out the Ice Soul Dragon slaying sword and shouted at the invisible dragon below him, "My old friend, the maze is meaningless to me. Let's change the way of the spiritual battle." Wuxia. The invisible dragon flapped its wings, and the maze was still slowly rising. "If you insist on creating a maze, then the sword in my hand can only cut off your head and make you reconsider what you should do." It was impossible to create a maze, impossible to create a maze in this lifetime. List's attitude was very firm. He would absolutely not enter a maze again. Wuxia. The invisible dragon's shout was full of anger. However, List had already aimed at its neck. He raised the red Ice Soul Dragon slaying sword, which was wrapped in smoke and had quickly turned into fire attribute. Instead of failing in the maze, it was better to kill the invisible dragon's mind and let it obtain a new life. He wanted to see if he could rely on this kind of violent method to win the spiritual battle. The maze stopped rising. The situation began to deadlock. After a short moment, the invisible dragon issued an unwilling shout, "Wuxia." At the same time, List also received the insistence of the invisible dragon's mind. It was necessary to create a maze, but he could reduce the difficulty of the maze. The rising maze did not extend any further. Instead, it formed the simplest planar maze, a traditional maze composed of countless parallel walls. It was not like the dazzling cubic maze in the dimensional killing formation, which could change positions at any time. List put away his sword and faintly smiled. "If it was a traditional maze, I would reluctantly accept it." It was very simple to crack a traditional maze. One just had to choose a wall and move forward, and one would be able to find the exit. Let's go, Invisible Dragon. Chapter 8:19. Bang, bang. Driven by List, the invisible dragon flew at high speed and stuck close to one of the walls of the maze. The seemingly complicated maze was quickly broken through by him. Looking back, the crystal world that made up the maze quickly collapsed and was replaced by a brand new maze. This maze encompassed the entire world and had no rules to speak of. It was just a combination of countless crystal structures. List and the invisible dragon stood on the throne at the center of the maze. Although it was called a throne, it was actually just a high platform. Wuxia. The invisible dragon suddenly flapped its wings and soared. The layers of maze walls rapidly retreated along with its flight, not obstructing it in the slightest. In this maze, the invisible dragon controlled everything. Suddenly, List's eyes brightened. He had already flown out of the maze and arrived in the real world, or rather, returned victorious from the battle of the mind. List's and the invisible dragon's thoughts began to synchronize, and their minds began to unite. From this moment on, he was a true sacred dragon knight, the invisible dragon knight. The process was somewhat tortuous, but the result was pretty good. List's previous mood of vexation, loss, indignation, and sourness also became cheerful. He could feel the invisible dragon's thoughts through the unity of mind, and the invisible dragon could also feel his joy. They guided and infected each other, but it was more List who took the lead. At this time, his vision was no longer of the crystal structure, but of his own naked eye. There was still no way for him to immediately connect with the invisible dragon's eyes. He still needed a lot of time to gradually adapt to how to control the invisible dragon and form its fighting strength. Let's go to a chi. List found that he could clearly see the invisible dragon without the need to use magic eyes. Its body was still as beautiful as flowing crystal. It was as if he was sitting on a crystal. Wuxia. The invisible dragon slowly landed on the top of the Maelstrom Mountain and restrained its dragon's might. Its slender body sat cross-legged on the ground, looking very graceful. Among the dragons that List had seen, Leo was undoubtedly the most malevolent, while the invisible dragon was the most beautiful. At the same time, he sensed the invisible dragon's age. Sure enough, it was a young dragon. It was only 80 years old, not yet over 100 years old. It seemed to be on an island further north of the Sapphire Kingdom, but its range of activities was very wide. Back then, the flower town was just a place it passed by out of curiosity. Only when it smelled the smoke grass did it remember that place, and then it tasted a feast once a year. But this year, it developed a new ability. It could break through the material plane and travel to another dimension of space. Then it got lost. Lost in the dimension beyond matter. Of course. Latitude beyond matter was just a noun that List had sorted out based on part of the invisible dragon's memory. That part of the memory was already fuzzy, and it was very difficult to carefully identify the details. All it knew was that it saw the frame ship pass through the great maelstrom magic portal and found the exit. As a result, the previous scene occurred. The invisible dragon suddenly rushed out of the vortex hole, triggering a series of accidents. Bang bang. Jumping down from the back of the invisible dragon, List walked over to Achi. Done. Achi said with a smile, "Congratulations, big brother. You rode another dragon and it's a very beautiful invisible dragon. After all, we are old friends." List maintained a calm tone. In fact, he was a bit embarrassed inside. Could the invisible dragon be regarded as an old friend? In fact, it was not. Apart from 2 meals, there was no friendship between the man and the dragon. Moreover, the goods and the money were clear. With the mentality of taking advantage of the situation, he arranged for the smoke grass feast. After the invisible dragon finished eating, it left behind a few gems. That was all. Dragons were arrogant and would not casually develop a friendship with a human. Calling the invisible dragon an old friend was a joke he made based on the records in the travels of the Earth Ranger Grift. In the night novel, the protagonist called the invisible dragon, who he met and left behind a space gem, an old friend. It was clear that the invisible dragon had indeed enjoyed the smoke grass and left behind a gift. So much so that List guessed that the invisible dragon Griff met was his own invisible dragon. Unfortunately, the travels of the Earth Ranger Griff did not record the author, and the source could not be verified. It was unknown when the work was created. Similarly, the invisible dragon did not remember Griff or Griff. At this moment, List was not embarrassed because he called Griff an old friend, but because of the invisible dragon's previous behavior. Achi, why did you refuse when the invisible dragon asked you to ride it? Brother, when did you let Achi ride the invisible dragon? Moreover, Achi is a wizard and does not have chi that can resonate with the dragon. Achi shook her head, puzzled. Then, why did you shake your head when it shouted at you? Because Achi did not know what it was shouting. His cries seemed to be the same. Achi does not know the language of dragons. I see. List nodded, feeling much better from the embarrassment. He had thought that Achi refused the invisible dragon out of consideration for his face. Unexpectedly, she did not understand what the invisible dragon meant. List looked at the other side of the Whirlpool Mountain. The knight and the serfs were still busy transporting supplies. Many knights raised their heads and looked curiously at the top of the mountain. They had heard the invisible dragon's cries and felt the dragon's might emitted by the invisible dragon, but they could not see the invisible dragon and did not know what had happened. However, the dragon knight and the archwizard were standing at the top of the mountain, so it was not a big deal. Withdrawing his gaze, List pointed to the invisible dragon, who was sitting on the ground and dozing off. Achi, can you see the invisible dragon with your naked eye? After eating a lot of smoke grass, the high had not completely dissipated, and it was slowly savoring the wonderful taste of the smoke grass. I can't. Achi dispersed the super magic eye, and immediately shook his head. However, List could see the invisible dragon with his naked eye at this moment. This was probably the beauty of riding a dragon. List and the invisible dragon had already become one, so he could naturally see the invisible dragon's body at all times. The principle behind this was unknown for the time being. Well, it won't be too late to study the information about the invisible dragon after I get used to it. I'll let Leo send you to the infernal plains first. You can guide the mages in building the mage tower there, while the invisible dragon and I will go out for a spin. List said after thinking for a moment. He had just ridden the invisible dragon, so he wanted to strike while the iron was hot to feel the invisible dragon's strength. List called out to Leo. The smell of smoke grass lingering in the air made Leo very dissatisfied. Even more dissatisfied was that it saw List subduing another dragon, threatening its position. It rushed at the squinting invisible dragon and roared fiercely, "Roar!" The invisible dragon was very good-tempered and did not care about Leo's roar. Or perhaps it was still immersed in the wonderful smell of the smoke grass. List patted Leo's scales and used the dragon heart code to express that Leo was still a partner fighting side by side with him. Regardless of the invisible dragon or the light green gem dragon, they were more of a resource-producing unit. And so on and so forth. Only then did Leo restrain his irritable mood. After Achi mounted the dragon, it suddenly flapped its wings and flew to the distant infernal plains. In the future, when I build a dragon nest, I have to separate these 3 dragons. It's best if they don't see each other. List was relieved. It was indeed not easy for a person to ride a multi-headed dragon, but he was also full of pride and a sense of accomplishment. He didn't know if there was a dragon knight in the legendary continent who had done this. He already had 3 dragons in his hands, as well as clues about the smoke dragon and emerald dragon. No one has ever done it before and no one will do it in the future, right? The thought was fleeting. List once again rode the invisible dragon. His mind and chi synchronized and he entered the dragon rider mode. Chapter 820. This chapter is 100,000 Years of Salted Fish. Amidst the blue sky and white clouds, the invisible dragon flew slowly. Its speed was not fast. To be more precise, its flying speed was not fast. However, the invisible dragon could always suddenly cross the vague illusory boundary while flying in the material world, and then the next moment, it would appear dozens of meters away. In other words, while flying, it was constantly activating its instant transmission ability. List had a hard time detecting signs of this ability even with his magic eyes. It was as if it did not involve magic, but an innate ability, just like a chi's ability to control water. Relying on this ability, the invisible dragon's peak speed could reach 400 kilometers per hour, far exceeding the speed of Leo and other dragons. Moreover, this innate ability would continue to strengthen as it grew older. As for what the upper limit of its growth was, it was unknown. List felt that it was likely that it could fly in the illusory world just like the time when it got lost. It entered the latitude outside the material world. Wuxia. The invisible dragon roared and transmitted its thoughts to List. It did not dare to fly to the limit again because the last time it flew to the limit, it suddenly passed through the barrier of the material space and arrived at the latitude outside the material world, causing it to get lost for a long time in the latitude outside the material world. It almost starved to death, exhausted to death, and went crazy. Don't be afraid, I'm here. Next time you won't get lost again. List comforted it. However, it received a contemptuous response from the invisible dragon. It believed that List could not even get out of the difficult labyrinth and could not be its guide. Then, a thought that List did not know how to feel came to its mind. The reason why it gave List a second chance for the spiritual battle was entirely for a chi. It turned out. It did allow the spiritual battle for the first time. Apart from inhaling too much of the smell of the smoked grass and eating too much of the beef, it thought that the Great Maelstrom Magic Transmission Array was related to List. A magic transmission array that could cross the material space undoubtedly had a great insight into space. Therefore, it acknowledged List and launched a spiritual battle. However, List's performance disappointed the dragon. But from the brief spiritual encounter with List, it was aware of the existence of a chi and mistakenly thought that the magic shooter A chi was the builder of the magic transmission array. Therefore, it hoped to form a cooperative relationship with a chi, using its own resources in exchange for a chi's spatial insight. Help it never get lost again. Until it truly grasped the ability to fly in dimensions beyond matter. The intelligence of dragons was very high, not inferior to that of humans at all. However, its plan was very good. A chi shook her head because she couldn't understand the invisible dragon's cry, causing the invisible dragon to mistakenly believe that a chi was refusing. It knew the relationship between List and a chi, so it guessed that it was because it was resisting List. Hence, it gave List a second chance for a spiritual battle. Once List became a Dragon Knight partner, magic shooter A chi would naturally help it lead the way. You're really smart. List sighed. However, thinking of the current situation, the man and the dragon who were spiritually united were not so happy. List was unhappy because he was only acting as a prop, a means used by the invisible dragon to attract a chi. The invisible dragon was unhappy because deep down, it didn't really recognize List. But life was never smooth sailing. The man and the dragon were already partners and in the future they needed to work together. List was the first to discard the former enmity and said in thought guidance, "Rest assured, invisible dragon, become my dragon. You will have many opportunities to communicate with a chi. I will let her teach you all the knowledge about space and help you never get lost again." Wuxia. The invisible dragon was happy to let go. With the knot in its heart opened, the spiritual unity between the man and the dragon became even more perfect and harmonious. "My name is List Flame, but you don't have a name yet. Why don't you call me Bard?" Bard represented the astral wandering god, a hero in League of Legends who could open portals. It was somewhat related to the ability of the invisible dragon, and it also implied List's expectations for the invisible dragon. He hoped that with the help of the invisible dragon, it would be easier for a chi to arrange magic arrays in the future, and he could also rely on the invisible dragon to move unhindered in the legendary continent. Wuxia. The invisible dragon didn't like or dislike the name Bard. It simply accepted such a code name. In fact, for itself, the invisible dragon was its name. All dragons were like this. Leo, Ethan, and Bard were just a habit of humans. In that case, Bard, let's try something interesting and fuse your invisibility ability with mine. List led the way of thinking. If it weren't for the invisible dragon's invisibility ability, he would be very surprised that others would find a person flying in the sky with his buttocks up. This was too damaging to the dignity of the Dragon Knight. The invisible dragon Bard quickly tried to fuse its ability with List. This ability involved the use of space magic. When the space magic and the dragon's battle energy began to resonate at a high frequency, List felt a strange feeling envelop him, as if he was immersed in water. But it wasn't water but the boundary of the material space, a special existence. The invisible dragon's magic could form a space gem, which directly wrapped a new small space in the material world. Therefore, with the help of magic, it could temporarily create an independent space, just like hiding in a two-dimensional space. But unlike the fixed space of the space gem, this temporary space was like a bubble. It would break with a poke and couldn't be used in battle. But it could perfectly hide the aura of the invisible dragon and List. Unless it was a magic eye type of detection skill, it would be absolutely impossible to detect the existence of the invisible Dragon Knight. This ability could be said to be terrifying, and it was an excellent concealment method for assassination. The only drawback was the change in the field of vision. After merging into the boundary of the material space, List found that the appearance of the real world quickly dissipated, and all matter became different crystal structures, just like the green code rain world seen by the protagonist in The Matrix. The world that List saw was a white crystal world. There were crystals everywhere, forming different kinds of animals and plants, mountains, soil, running water, and so on. He called this field of vision crystal white vision. By the time he familiarized himself with this field of vision, it was almost evening. Returning to the infernal plains. The figures of Leo and Ichi appeared in the crystal white vision. However, to List's surprise, Leo's figure turned out to be a fiery red flame structure, while Ichi's was a bluish-white water structure. This was the only color that appeared in the crystal white vision, as well as a non-crystal structure. This is because the magic level of Ichi in Leo exceeds the magic level of low magic? At this moment, Leo, who was sleeping on the ground, suddenly raised his neck and stared in List's direction. He was keenly aware of a threat approaching. Although he couldn't see the invisible dragon, nor could he smell its aura, he could still discover the invisible dragon by relying on the special connection between dragons. Using the Dragon Heart code, List calmed the restless Leo at the cost of a few potions. At this time, Ichi also raised her head and looked at the sky. She didn't perceive the existence of the invisible dragon, but she had already guessed the result from Leo's reaction. Bang! List signaled the invisible dragon to find a place nearby to rest and not to go too far. He then got up and descended from the sky. When he fell to the ground and maintained a squatting posture, the space magic in his body had dissipated, and his figure slowly recovered. He stood up and walked towards Ichi. His red cloak swayed behind him. He didn't wear a helmet, and his pale golden hair reflected the brilliance of the setting sun. His handsome figure was also plated with a layer of golden light. Chapter 821. After returning, Ichi wanted to communicate with the invisible dragon immediately and figure out the secrets of space mastered by the invisible dragon as soon as possible, but there was no language barrier and List had no time to translate. She could only supervise the construction of the Master Tower in Xinhua Plain and communicate with the Master Tower in Maelstrom Town to do some research on the edges of the Maelstrom. At the same time, she concentrated on practicing ice elemental magic and strived to master it as soon as possible to open the next stage of elemental incarnation switching, Earth Attribute. With the Earth Attribute elemental incarnation, it would be easy to shape the terrain. She was still thinking about the concept of the canal in the sky. The Master Tower was under construction. The construction of Xinhua Town was also carried out rapidly with the arrival of craftsmen and serfs. There were dense forests nearby, and trees could be cut down at any time to build houses. With the strong bonding effect of rubber water, the construction progress was rapid. There was also no shortage of stones. List's young follower, Emily, either took the Blizzard Beast team into the forest to hunt with orders of chivalry every day, or directed the Blizzard Beast team to make rocks and contribute to the construction of the town. It had to be said that the evolved Blizzard Beast had a large output of stones, enough for the town's needs. Unfortunately, the bloodline fruit was rare, and new Blizzard Beasts could not be cultivated to change the problem of reproductive isolation. Because the rock thorns produced by the Blizzard Beast were broken, the shape of the stone could not be guaranteed. Jemiah rammed Earth, the chief construction commander of Xinhua Town, proposed to List to build a brick factory in Xinhua Plain to burn bricks, plates, and culverts. The construction of the new town on Black Horse Island was a modern construction scheme of laying slabs on the ground and burying culverts underground. List agreed to Jemiah's proposal and was ready to build a new fire dragon brick factory in Xinhua Plain. However, when he asked Leo for the fire dragon, he was refused. Roar. The reason for Leo's refusal was very legitimate. At first, List forced him to detonate the volcano eruption, wasting half of the fire dragon's power. Since then, the volcano has not been found, and the fire dragon has not recovered, seriously delaying its growth and development. Now that List was riding the light emerald dragon Ethan and the invisible dragon Bard, Leo felt that his position was under threat and was unwilling to weaken his own strength. "Don't be stingy, Leo," List comforted his partner. "The Flame Archipelago is under development. This island and the surrounding archipelagos cover a large area. There must be new volcanoes for you to train in. After I finish the construction of Swirl Town, I'll explore the Flame Archipelago with you. What do you think?" After much consideration for the future, Leo nodded his head in agreement. It spat out some fire dragon super magic and gave it to List. The fire dragon super magic that was ignited was enough to build 7 to 8 high-temperature kills, which could support a large fire dragon brick factory. When List saw Leo look dispirited after he spat out the fire dragon super demon, List felt sorry for him. Although Leo was an out-and-out evil dragon that would always breed evil thoughts, he was, after all, bred by himself, and his feelings were completely different from the light green gemstone dragon and the invisible dragon. Moreover, Leo is a combat-type dragon and is still young. He needs to develop. Only fire dragons that had matured would be able to produce more fire dragon supreme magic beasts and lay the foundation for the industrialization of the territory. We need to find an active volcano as soon as possible. After letting Leo return to his body to sleep to reduce further consumption, List summoned the invisible dragon Bard. He was prepared to ride more to familiarize himself with Bard and try to explore the invisible dragon's training method. He wanted to complete the Invisible Dragon Knight, Dragon Battle Energy Secret Manual as soon as possible. Regardless of whether it was the Fire Dragon or the Invisible Dragon, there were no relevant writing records. He needed to explore it alone. Fortunately, there was a light green gemstone dragon that had passed through several Dragon Knight generations, leaving behind many valuable experiences that List could use for reference. Relying on this experience and continuous exploration with Leo, List had already started to compile 2 dragon riding secret manuals: the complete manual of List's Dragon Knight training and the Fire Dragon Knight, Dragon Battle Energy Secret Manual. Among them, the Fire Dragon Knight, Dragon Battle Energy Secret Manual was a pure battle energy training and combat secret manual. Currently it stopped at 5 moves: Dragon Slash, Sky Burning Sweep, Sun Swallowing Stab, Sea Boiling Twist and Earth Shaking Hammer. The complete manual of List's Dragon Knight training was a miscellaneous book. It recorded all kinds of bits and pieces about dragon riding training. It recorded how to prepare before riding a dragon, techniques for spiritual battles, development of the dragon's abilities and many non-combat skills. Demonic Dragon Energy Training, Dragon Breath Tempering, Dragon Power Focus, Dragon Heart Code, Dragon Blood Infection, Dragon Rider Resonance, Dragon Eye Track and other skills were all recorded in detail. Not only was it limited to fire dragon training, but he also hoped that this book could become the standard introductory secret manual for all Dragon Knight. He wanted it to be a family heirloom for his descendants to read for generations to increase the probability of his descendants becoming a Dragon Knight and protect the family's everlasting foundation. "Bard, let's try the Dragon Eye Track." The wind whistled. List had already entered stealth mode along with the invisible dragon. They flew downstream along the Whirlpool River that the Infernal Flame Plain relied on. The water volume of this small river was very large. After all, it was formed by the Whirlpool waterfall that surged down from the Whirlpool Mountain. It twisted and turned along the way, and the water surface gradually expanded. The small river became a large river. Other tributaries continuously flowed into the Whirlpool River, causing the river surface to expand again and again. At the Infernal Flame Plain, the river surface was only 2 meters wide. By the time it reached 300 kilometers away, the river surface was already 50 meters wide. The river also converged with another river that was more than 30 meters wide and began to flow from the southeast to the southwest. At this time, the flow of water in the river increased sharply. After another 200 kilometers, the river width reached more than 130 meters. Can be called a whirlpool river. List exclaimed in admiration. At this time, the river converged into a large river that was 80 meters wide, and it flowed westward downstream. After about 50 kilometers, the river suddenly turned south again, and the width of the water surface reached an astonishing 500 meters. By the time it reached the estuary, the width was unknown because there was a delta formed by the impact of a large whirlpool river. Sparse trees grew there like a large swamp. Using the Whirlpool Mountain as the main trunk of the Whirlpool River, the total length is about 1,000 kilometers, similar to the Huai River on Earth. Moreover, the terrain of the Whirlpool River basin is relatively flat, very much like the land of fish and rice between Jianghu and Huai River. I don't know if it can be developed into the land of fish and rice in the Whirlpool River. The development of humans on the legendary continent basically used river basins as living areas. The Infernal Island was huge and could not be completely developed in a short time, so List also planned to use the Whirlpool River basin as the main development area in the future. Of course, not necessarily. The Whirlpool River was only the southeast corner of the Infernal Island. Perhaps there were wider and more fertile river basins in other parts of the island that were more suitable for development. Bard, let's find a place at the mouth of the Whirlpool River to rest for a while. At the same time, we can summarize the reason why the Dragon Eye's trajectory has been delayed. Landing on a protruding hill at the mouth of the river, the invisible dragon shouted, "Wuxia!" It was looking for List for smoke grass. Here. List took out a piece of smoke grass and stuffed it into the invisible dragon's mouth. The invisible dragon immediately chewed the smoke grass happily, tasting the flavor released by the smoke grass. This thing couldn't be eaten too much as it would make one easily excited. List calmly took out a mask and put it on his face. The invisible dragon had many benefits. The only sad thing was its heavy taste. Of all the things it could eat, it just had to eat the smoke grass. Fortunately, the digestive power of the dragon's saliva was very strong. After eating the smoke grass, the flavor quickly dispersed with the wind, and there was no residual stench left in its mouth. Chapter 822. After thinking about the image problem for a moment, List then began to think about the training with the invisible dragon. The invisible dragon was not an elemental dragon. Although it could hide in the material boundary and become invisible, it could not elementalize and integrate into List's body. Therefore, many of the training skills suitable for List were not suitable for the invisible dragon. Moreover, its dragon breath was a white mist composed of space magic. The white mist could break any material in its path. It was a powerful attack move. Obviously, this white mist dragon breath could not be used to train the dragon breath to temper the body. There was nothing much to say about dragon power focus. The Dragon Knight basically had this skill, which guided the dragon to concentrate its strength into a bundle and no longer disperse. The invisible dragon could also practice the Dragon Heart Code, but it had to learn its rules before it could communicate with List across space. Dragon blood infection was naturally not a problem. The Bampo cattle and estuarine pigs on Black Horse Island were all masterpieces of the invisible dragon's infection. Dragon Knight resonance was a basic operation, so it was not a problem. The problem now was that there were some problems when List fused his Chi secret skill with the invisible dragon. Spiral rotation, aura decay, and magic eye were all difficult to operate on the invisible dragon. The auxiliary effects of the spiral rotation and aura decay were weak and could be ignored. Only the magic eye was List's special skill, and it must be implemented on the invisible dragon. The invisible dragon could freely travel through space. Once it had the assistance of the magic eye, perhaps the essence of the world would be grasped by List. At worst, the magic eye should be able to help the invisible dragon recognize the way so as not to get lost in the material world next time. Wuxia. After chewing the smoke grass, the invisible dragon was slightly excited. It cooperated with List's communication and constantly discussed the cultivation of the magic eye. It could feel that this Chi secret skill was very important to it. The dragon's IQ was no worse than that of humans. The invisible dragon was naturally qualified to discuss skills with List. One man and one dragon stood on the vast swamp and discussed until it was dark. They had basically sorted out their ideas. So, Bard, let's continue experimenting with the magic eye. Wuxia. Hung Long, the formless dragon, flapped its wings. One man and one dragon flew into the sky again, following the Whirlpool River for the second time. During this period, List constantly tried to cast magic eyes. Finally, when he flew to the middle of the Whirlpool River, List, who was casting magic eyes, suddenly connected with the invisible dragon's field of vision. The next moment, the world returned to its crystalline state. Crystalline trees, crystalline rivers, crystalline distant stars. This was the same as what the invisible dragon could see with its naked eye, which was a variety of crystalline structures. However, the magic eye was still effective. There was a slight change in the world of the crystal structure, but this change made the field of view completely different. That was because there were other colors in his field of vision besides the crystal white. Although these colors weren't very bright, there was an abrupt barrier between them and the white world of crystals. In an instant, Liszt understood the effect of mana eyes on the invisible dragon. Previously, apart from the white world of crystals, the invisible dragon's vision could only be reflected by super and high magic. With the help of mana eyes, even low magic can be reflected. The invisible dragon's field of vision was particularly mystical. The crystal structure of the white field of vision was similar to the direct reflection of a certain special latitude. Only super and high magic could be seen in their original form. Therefore, it could easily detect threatening magic power levels. Back then, when Liszt was hiding in the tunnel, he was clearly discovered with the help of the white field of vision. Now, with the help of mana eyes, the white field of vision was even more frightening and could even detect low magic ranks. Awesome. Bard, there are a lot of plants and animals with magic power in the vicinity of this whirlpool river. Many of them might even be sprites. It seems that we will have to search for new islands in the future. Liszt looked around, not in a hurry to collect the crystal structures with magic power. Today he just wanted to familiarize himself with his skills. Only lesser sprites and greater sprites were worthy of him taking action. Other sprite worms were already not worthy of him taking action. As a dignified dragon knight, he really shouldn't bow down for a few sprite worms. He would have orders of chivalry search for sprite worms in the process of pioneering. If he could find them, then he would look for them. If he couldn't, then so be it. In any case, most of the sprites in the wild were of relatively low value. He preferred the sprite worms that he cultivated himself, which were high-value cash crops such as potions, grains, and so on. The invisible dragon and Liszt's mind were one, so it understood what Liszt was thinking. It flew close to the ground, continuously experimenting with the new white field of vision. The mana eyes that operated together with Leo were called dragon eye trajectories. The mana eyes that operated together with the invisible dragon were named crystal trajectories after Liszt pondered for a bit. The advantage of dragon eye trajectories lay in its clear insight into the details, including the trajectory of magic power circulation, which was clearly displayed in the fire dragon's field of vision. The advantage of crystal trajectories lay in its clear distinction of magic power levels, which had the effect of simplifying complex things. Its overall sweeping effect was astonishing. Most importantly, the white field of vision was only slightly grayish at night, not completely pitch black. In other words, the invisible dragon had the ability to see at night. This was a very important point as it allowed Liszt to move freely at night. Additionally, the invisible dragon could wander on the material boundary. It was simply a tailor-made assassin-type dragon knight. Appearing and disappearing like a ghost, it was more terrifying than the light dragon that could manipulate light. Once the invisible dragon and I finished the Invisible Dragon Knight, Dragon Chi secret book, all the Dragon Knight of the other countries will not be able to sleep peacefully at night. He did not intend to hide the invisible dragon for too long. He would release a few space gems and sell them at sky-high prices. Those kingdoms and even empires definitely knew of the existence of the Holy Dragon, so there was no need to keep the invisible dragon a secret. In fact, with the 3 dragons in hand, coupled with Archmage A Chi's strong support, he would directly announce the establishment of a kingdom after the territory relocation was completed. Of course, this matter was not urgent. The exploration of the Flame Archipelago had just begun, and even the mainland countries facing the sea had not been clearly investigated. There was no need to be anxious about long-term planning. For now, he would first gain a firm foothold in the Infernal Plains and develop the Flame Island from the inside out. In passing, he would participate in a few development orders and snatch some materials from the Eagle Kingdom to develop the Flame Archipelago. After returning to the Infernal Plains, Liszt had a not sumptuous dinner with several titled followers, but he did not drink. After the meal, he returned to his residence and had a discussion with Chi. Regarding the invisible dragon's crystal white vision, the world outside the material world and other space-related content, they discussed in detail. When the discussion reached a deeper level, Liszt also called the invisible dragon to act as a translator and facilitate direct communication between Chi and the invisible dragon. The invisible dragon had a very good impression of Chi. It let Liszt ride it easily because it hoped to get Chi's assistance. Being lost in the world outside the material world frightened it. The communication ended at midnight. Brother Achi got a lot of important information from Bard. The research on the magic transmission array is very closely related. It will take a few days to carefully sort it out. Can we postpone our return? Chapter 823. In the next few days, List would spend half a day almost every day to break in and train with the invisible dragon. Although he still hadn't researched any Dookie secret book, he had already mastered the usage of crystal white vision. For this reason, he had also discovered several sprites in the nearby forest. There were no greater sprites or lesser sprites, only 6 ordinary plant sprite worms which did not have high economic value. At present he already had over 100 sprite worms. Therefore he paid very little attention to a single sprite worm. However, sprites were sprites and their potential was huge. Who knew whether the value of a wheat-type sprite worm would double all of a sudden because it had given birth to a variant magic ingredient wheat? Therefore, every sprite worm had to be carefully taken care of. For this reason he had already planned to set up a department that specialized in researching, discovering, protecting and nurturing elves. It would be responsible for coordinating and managing the elves in the territory. The mages were undoubtedly the most suitable to be the main force of elven research. However, List had been striving to become a mage, and did not want the mages to be too deeply involved in the operation of the territory. I might as well dilute the sorcerer class and popularize the arcanist system. Not only can the sorcerer join the arcanist system, but the knight can also join the arcanist system. The Iron Knight can barely be counted as a research unit. It's easier to control it with the arcanist system. Therefore, after careful consideration, he decided to establish a research and elf training unit as an opportunity to reform the spellcaster system in the territory and officially transition to the arcanist system. The new research institute will be called Elven College. The college will be a basic research institute for arcanists in the territory. Elven College will be responsible for the research on elves, Magic College will be responsible for the research on the nature of magic and Knight College will be responsible for the training of knight. Also, the Agricultural College will be responsible for farming research, the Zhanjing College will be responsible for intelligence and advising, the Equipment College will be responsible for magic equipment and weapon manufacturing, as well as the Royal College, which will coordinate and guide all the colleges and report directly to me. They will also be responsible for research and raising dragons. List was prepared to become the principal of the Royal School himself, with Achi as the deputy principal and Chris as the secretary general. He himself would serve as the dean of the Knight Academy, Achi would serve as the dean of the Elven Academy, Crazy would still serve as the dean of the Magic Academy, and the candidates for the other academies would be decided. As for the main positions in the academy, they were based on the rank of an arcana master. The lowest level researchers and teachers had to have the lowest title of arcanist. Those who were responsible for individual projects or leading a teaching project must have the title of Grand Arcanist. In order to be in charge of a school, one had to have the title of Head Arcanist and Head Arcana Tutor in order to be qualified to work in the Royal School. If one wanted to hold a leadership position in the Royal School, as well as to be involved in dragon-related research, one had to have the title of Arcana Tutor. There was no doubt that List and Achi were qualified to be Arcana Tutors, and for the time being only the two of them were qualified. Lucien wrote Academy Arcanist Plan in his notebook. List did not announce it immediately. For the time being it was just a concept. It would not be too late to reform it after the founding of the People's Republic. At present, the old territory was still accumulating wealth, and the new territory was still waiting to be developed, so it was not advisable to be too hasty. After all, the Guild of Magic would not remain once the reform was carried out. At this stage, the Guild of Magic was the best way to recruit mages on a pilgrimage. There was still a reason for its existence. Only when the mages had gotten used to the management of the Guild of Magic and began to transform into researchers would it be a good time for reform. However, just as List was preparing to develop the Flame Archipelago, a piece of bad news came from the territory, and a message was quickly presented to his desk through the magic platform. The great noble of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, Marquis of Red Crab Island, former captain of the court fleet, Merlin Longtaro, passed away on the 3rd of July 154 of the Sapphire calendar, and the funeral was scheduled to be held on the 15th of July. Today was the 5th of July. Putting down the paper that recorded the message, List placed his hands on the table and rubbed his forehead. The good mood he had been in for the past few days had faded, and he felt a little suffocated. Although he had been mentally prepared for the fact that Marquis Merlin could pass away at any time, However, when this moment came, it was still difficult for him to welcome it with a calm mind. Apart from Achi, the person closest to him in this world had passed away just like that. Although the interests between the nobles were far greater than the ties of kinship, Marquis Merlin's care for his grandson still filled List's heart with respect. As a transmigrator, the few interactions he had with the old man were probably the most positive feelings he had about kinship. This also caused him to feel much closer to the Taro family than to the Tulip family. Philip informed Count Cross and Viscount Fox to come to the camp for a meeting. Yes, Your Highness. A moment later, Cross Buckthorn and Fox came together. I called you here because I'm about to leave Flame Island and return to the territory. The development work here will be handed over to you. Cross will take the lead and Fox will assist. Please rest assured, Your Highness. The two accepted the order. You have to complete the layout of Firewood Town as soon as possible. I will soon return with 10 new frame ships, with half of the resources and half of the personnel. In addition, Duroot Red Apricot has already gathered 700 Earth Knight and 1,300 Trainee Knight, as well as a large number of serfs. They are coming by ship and their residences need to be arranged. Understood. However, you don't need to be responsible for the passage along the Whirlpool River. When I come back, I will be responsible for opening it myself. There are many large World of Warcraft along the way and their strength should not be weak. List said again. As one of the 3 followers of List, Duroot Red Apricot was previously sent to gather the Knight of Iron Heel City to go to Flame Island for the development. Their fleet had no external forces to rely on, and it would take a long time to take a ship from Black Horse Island to Flame Island. However, List would let Achi go to help and get the fleet to Flame Island as soon as possible. At that time, this group of Knight would go upstream along the Whirlpool River, and at the same time open a passage to the Whirlpool River to lay the foundation for future residential development. After the instructions, List sent the two away, then went straight to the simple laboratory and found Achi, who was busy. Achi, I may have to let you delay the experimental research. What's wrong, brother? Marquis Merlin passed away. I need to rush back immediately. Achi did not pay much attention to humans, but she understood List's feelings for Marquis Merlin, so she nodded meekly. Well, Achi will tidy up the experimental data. After tidying up the data, they set off immediately. Instead of summoning the little fire dragon Leo, he rode on the invisible dragon Bard and set off to the sea. Along the way, he let Achi personally feel the feeling of immersing in the material boundary while being wrapped in space magic, deepening her understanding of space magic and thus better grasping the principle of the magic transmission array. After rushing through the night, on the afternoon of July 6th, the two arrived at the shore of Red Crab Island. Chapter 824. In the evening, Leo finally flew to the mountain range where the Long Taro Castle was located. The tall and magnificent Long Taro Castle was originally decorated with colorful flowers and flags, but now the flowers had been removed and black and white flags were hung on the outer walls. Many carriages were parked in the square in front of the Long Taro Castle, which should be the followers of Marquis Merlin. Roar! The little fire dragon Leo issued a loud and deep dragon roar, reminding the Long Taro Castle of the arrival of him and List. Although the dragon's voice was different, the majesty contained in the tone always made people immediately react that it was a dragon. Therefore, after the dragon roar, a large number of aristocrats suddenly poured out of the Long Taro Castle. Dragon. It's a fire dragon. His Highness List has arrived. His Highness Dragon Knight has come to attend the funeral of Marquis Merlin. The Mesiro couple and the Meopal couple stood in the crowd. When they saw the traces of the fire dragon, their sad mood of the past few days could not help but be a bit uplifted. It's List. Roland Pinecone and the Melinda couple, who followed behind the Mesiro couple, couldn't help but smile. List came so fast. When the news of grandfather's death spread, I'm afraid that List has already arrived. Meopal clenched his fists. The arrival of his cousin made him feel that the burden on his shoulders was a lot lighter. Marquis Merlin was the solid pillar of the Taro family, and his fall made the Taro family anxious and fearful. The arrival of the fire dragon explained List's attitude. He would keep his promise and become the backing of the Taro family. That was enough. With the support of List, the position of the Taro family in the Sapphire Grand Duchy would not be shaken by the death of Marquis Merlin. The Sapphire family would not have any improper thoughts, and the followers who were originally loyal to Marquis Merlin would not dare to have any thoughts. Instead, they should prepare to pledge allegiance to Mesiro. This was indeed the case. In the crowd, Count Sark Broccoli, Durante Hyacinth, and the other counts looked at the slowly flying fire dragon, as well as the faintly discernible silver-armored knight on the dragon's back. Their originally surging emotions were quickly extinguished. At this time, whoever dared to refuse to follow Mesiro would probably not be able to see the sun the next day. After the arrival of the Fire Dragon Knight List, the turmoil in the hearts of the people in the Longtaro castle calmed down. Miopal roused his spirits and commanded the knight of the family to quickly clear a large open space in the plaza for the descent of the Fire Dragon. The nobles raised their heads and looked at the insufferably mighty Fire Dragon in awe. The noble ladies and young ladies who came along had fiery gazes. Roar. Leo once again issued a dragon roar, and the dragon power was wantonly released, instantly enveloping the entire Longtaro castle. It still had the evil side of a dragon in its heart. Other than List, all other humans were insignificant ants in its eyes. It could crush them at will, and the Firebird was just a show of strength. Leo, retract your dragon aura. List's clear voice rang in the ears of the people who were trembling under the pressure of the dragon's might, quickly dispelling their embarrassment. The nobles showed gratitude to List. But they did not know that Leo's release of the dragon's might was tacitly approved by List. As the Dragon Knight, it was necessary for him to let everyone remember the supreme majesty of the Dragon Knight. The baptism of the dragon's might was far more intuitive to outsiders than the number of people he had killed, and it would allow them to clearly understand the status of the Dragon Knight. Boom. Leo landed on the ground, cracking the stones in the plaza and causing the earth to tremble. List jumped down from the dragon's back with a chi. At this time, everyone noticed that there was a petite female wizard beside List. They understood the identity of the wizard in a flash. It turned out that not only did the Dragon Knight personally come, but also the Arch-Wizard had also come. Leo, go to the mountain and rest. When Leo heard this, he flapped his wings and soared in the direction of the falling sun, leaving behind a sinister silhouette that shone brightly under the last rays of the setting sun. The mountain to the west was the one behind the Longtaro castle, and there was a dense forest on the top of the mountain for Leo to ravage. At this time, the Masillos couple, along with many nobles, came over to List and bowed. List, my dear nephew, the great Dragon Knight and the great Arch-Wizard Acroides, thank you for coming. List quickly stepped forward and helped the Masillos couple up. Uncle, Aunt, I immediately rushed back from the open sea when I received the bad news. Unfortunately, you did not inform me earlier, so I had no chance to see grandfather for the last time. I did not expect that the small gathering on Uncle's birthday would turn out to be a farewell. In May, shortly after the end of the Battle of the Sea, List came to the Longtaro castle on Masillo's birthday. At that time, Marquis Merlin's health had not deteriorated as it had been during the new year. On the contrary, because of little Princess Angela's pregnancy, Miopal's promotion to a Sky Knight, and the Taro family's participation in List's trade plan, his mood was very good and his health showed signs of improvement. But he did not expect that he would not be able to survive this year. Father had an accident while trying to operate Chi, causing his health to deteriorate rapidly. He was unable to hold on until I came to inform you. Before leaving, he mentioned you several times, saying that he did not get to see the moment you established your country. Alas. List also sighed. However, Miopal said, Father, List, when grandfather left, he told us not to feel sad for him. He left very calmly, all the worries in his heart settled, and with a smile on his face, he sought refuge with the glory of the night. That's right, List, Angela, who had a big belly, echoed. In that case, let's go inside the castle. Uncle, I want to see grandfather's remains first. List restrained his sadness. Thus, surrounded by a crowd of nobles, List and a Chi arrived at the castle hall. A gorgeous coffin was placed in the hall. At the side, several wizards were maintaining the operation of ice magic to ensure that Marquis Merlin's body would not be destroyed in the hot summer weather. Marquis Merlin's eyes were closed, his ashy face was serene, and he was wearing an exquisite frac abbey that symbolized a marquis. A crystal-carved staff was placed on his chest, and below it was a flag embroidered with the symbol of the Taro family. List stood in front of the coffin and took out a prepared letter from his bosom. It was a letter personally written by Marquis Merlin a few years ago, which he gave to List as a New Year's gift. It would be of great benefit to his promotion to a Sky Knight. He placed the letter in a corner of the coffin. He could not help but say in a deep voice, Grandfather, your gift made me strive forward. Now, as a Dragon Knight, I assure you that I will give the Taro family shelter. The Taro family's bloodline will prosper on the sea together with the Flame family and the Tulip family. After saying that, he solemnly bowed. After a moment, in the undisturbed study, Mesiro, Roland Pinecone, Miopal, and List were sitting on 4 chairs. Mesiro said directly, List, thank you for your promise in front of Father's coffin. Father always said that you would be a reliable help to the Taro family, and now the Taro family needs your shelter. Uncle Roland, although we belong to different families, we are all relatives. Grandfather's bloodline weaves us together. As long as I live, your family can rely on me as a barrier. If you want, you can also go to my country to develop. Mesiro obviously could not give up Red Crab Island, which he had operated for several generations. Chapter 825. The Taro family was known for their shrewdness. The Marquis of Red Crab Island, Merlin Long Taro, also boasted of his shrewdness. He did not learn from other Marquis families and adopt the method of marriage. Instead, he valued the potential of the other party. The eldest son, Mesiro, married the daughter of an earl who was backed by the Iron Knight family, so the Taro family did not lack weapons and equipment. The eldest daughter, Melinda, married the son of the Viscount of Longtail City, Roland Pinecone, who was known as a genius. The youngest daughter, Melissa, married the Viscount of Tahiti City, Lee William. A few years after the marriage, Lee William was enfeoffed as the Earl of Coral Island because of his outstanding military exploits. He also quickly became a sword saint, proving Marquis Merlin's ability to judge people. However, Roland did not rise on the battlefield as he thought. On the contrary, after Viscount Roland inherited the title, his performance was very mediocre. He did not dare to go to the battlefield for a time, and his strength stopped at the elite Earth Knight. At this point, Roland became a stain in Marquis Merlin's life. He did not get promoted for more than 20 years, and was still a Viscount of Longtail City. Although he was resentful, Viscount Roland did not dare to go to the battlefield to prove himself, so he muddled along for more than 20 years. Marquis Merlin died, and Mesiro, who was about to inherit the Marquis title, also did not like his useless brother-in-law. So Roland did not have much loyalty to the Taro family. Even if they lived together on Red Crab Island, he would not necessarily come to Long Taro Castle a few times a year. Maybe he did not come as often as List and his sister. According to the knight system of the legendary continent, the Earl must become a Sky Knight before he could be enfeoffed. Roland probably did not have any thoughts about his title, but looking at the high-spirited Fire Dragon Knight List in front of him, his decadent mind was once again stirred. Perhaps due to his strength, he could not be promoted to Earl, and his two sons' talent was not outstanding. But following List to mix the identity of a founding hero was obviously very easy. At that time he could count on List to tilt a little more resources, and the Pinecone family's strength was just around the corner. It was better than staying in Red Crab Island and Longtail City. But he did not immediately make up his mind. He was ready to listen to what List had to say. Uncle, cousin, please keep this a secret for me. List put down the teacup and said calmly, I've already found the location of my country's establishment. It's a huge archipelago with a surface area far larger than the Grand Duchy of Sapphire. I've already started developing this flame archipelago. Roland was stunned. An archipelago larger than Sapphire? The fire in his heart quickly burned. The total area of the Sapphire Islands was about 2 million square kilometers, and there were still many undeveloped islands. If the Flame Archipelago was larger than the Sapphire Archipelago, wouldn't there be more undeveloped islands? One could imagine how much manpower List would need to develop them. The Flame Archipelago is about twice the size of the Sapphire Archipelago. It is extremely difficult to develop it, especially due to the lack of population, which severely restricts the establishment of a country. Therefore, I am preparing to plunder the population of the Eagle Kingdom over the next few years. Once my sea fleet is formed, I will launch a war alone. Start a war alone? Yes, taking advantage of the fact that the Eagle Kingdom is preoccupied with its own affairs, I will personally lead the plunder. It is very likely that the coastal areas of the Eagle Kingdom will be left empty. Mesiro could not help but sigh. Leaving the coastal areas of the Eagle Kingdom empty? List, can the Eagle Kingdom tolerate such a huge plunder? So what if they can't tolerate it? List suddenly gave birth to an uncontrollable heroic spirit and blurted out, Uncle, I never fight a battle I am not sure of. Unless the Eagle Kingdom sends all the Dragon Knight to fight with me in a dragon-slaying war, I have nothing to fear. The Eagle Kingdom has 5 Dragon Knight. Mesiro felt that his nephew was somewhat arrogant. But I also have more than 1 dragon, List said indifferently. What? Mesiro, Roland, and Meopel all stared with their eyes wide open. List, this, what do you mean? Originally intending to keep it a secret, but unfortunately he could not hold back for a while. List simply no longer concealed it. Carl Low Violet died in battle, and the light green gem dragon has fallen into my hands. I am currently cultivating a dragon knight for the light green gem dragon. In addition, I have conquered another dragon on Blazing Island. At present, I have a total of 3 dragons. 3 dragons and a magic shooter. The study room suddenly fell into absolute silence. Mesiro and the other 2 were completely stunned and did not know what to say for a long time. In the end, it was Miopal who was able to accept it and asked in a trembling voice, "List, my dear cousin, you are a dragon knight. I should not doubt you, but do you really have 3 dragons? There is no benefit in deceiving you, is there? Wait a moment, I will go and get something." After saying this, List got up and left the study room, walking towards the bedroom arranged for him by the Longtaro castle. This was just an act. In fact, he had already taken out a few light green gems from his space ring on the way. The invisible dragon needed to be kept a secret for the time being. The news of the holy dragon had to wait until he was fully fledged before it could be exposed. Otherwise, it would attract too much hatred. First, he revealed the light green gem dragon. Perhaps it would not take long for it to reach the ears of the Sapphire Grand Duke, and then slowly spread to the Eagle Kingdom and the Steel Ridge Kingdom. However, he was not afraid of the news leaking. The deterrence of the 3-headed dragon was enough to allow List to move unfettered across the sea. Moreover, sooner or later, the light green gems would be sold in exchange for resources, and the Eagle Kingdom would naturally know about it. At that time, it would depend on whether they would dare to come and ask for the light green gem dragon. It would not be a big deal if a dragon-slaying battle occurred. In any case, the Flame Archipelago was impoverished. He had the invisible dragon to hide his body and a chi to control the seawater. If he could not win, he could just run away. Once the Dragon Knight of the Eagle Kingdom left, the Flame Archipelago would be rebuilt. However, at that time, the hatred would be sown, and the Eagle Kingdom would no longer have peace. The Dragon Knight of the Eagle Kingdom would also have to be careful of being assassinated. In short, List was not afraid. He now left the study room to give his uncle and uncle time to digest the news. In the study room, Miopal was already scratching his ears and cheeks anxiously. "Father, uncle, List has a 3-headed dragon. Mesiro, do you think this is true? A 3-headed dragon? Ah, a 3-headed dragon, this is simply unimaginable." Mesiro forced himself to calm down and muttered to himself, "List has a steady character, he will not lie. Moreover, the light green gem dragon is missing, and the only one who can find this dragon in the sea is probably that archmage Achilles Ides. As for the other dragon, with him and his excellency Achilles Ides joining hands, it would not be difficult to conquer it." Achi's reputation was far more resounding than that of List. After all, an archmage had not been born for hundreds of years. At the time of the dragon-slaying battle, Achi's magic caused a far more shocking scene than the Dragon Knight, who was more focused on physical combat, leaving a deep impression on everyone. It could be said that after that battle, when the true overlord of the Azure Wave Sea was mentioned, everyone would first think of Achi. The Dragon Knight could not control water, while the archmage could control the sea as if it were clay. With Mesiro's analysis, Roland and Miopal believed that List indeed had a 3-headed dragon. The 3-headed dragon and the archmage were such huge forces that they were more than enough to establish a maritime kingdom. Roland clenched his fist on the spot. Breathing heavily, he said, "Mesiro, I plan to follow List to the Flame Archipelago. I wonder if you have any objections?" Mesiro narrowed his eyes. "I wish the Pinecone family prosperity in the Flame Archipelago." Roland heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you." Chapter 826. List placed a few light emeralds on the table. "These are light emeralds produced by the light emerald dragon for me. If the Dragon Knight of the Eagle Kingdom dares to start a dragon-slaying war with me again, he might send me another dragon." Even if he didn't take out the light emeralds, Mesiro and the other 2 believed that he had a 3-headed dragon. However, the impact of the emeralds was obviously greater. "Light emerald dragon, I didn't expect the Eagle Kingdom to launch a dragon-slaying war with great difficulty. Not only did they not obtain any benefits, but they also lost a dragon and a dragon knight." Mesiro looked at List, his evaluation of his nephew infinitely rising. "You can really fight against a country by yourself. This is just the beginning. The development potential of the maritime countries can't compare to that of the mainland countries. Sooner or later, I will kill my way to the legendary continent and build a huge kingdom that will dominate the land and sea." List was also bragging that he didn't need to pay taxes. The land of the legendary continent should be occupied by various kingdoms. I'm afraid it will be difficult to find new territories for you to build a country. Mesiro thought about it and felt that he should advise List to keep a low profile. Miopal was excited. List, if you can build a kingdom that will span the land and sea, I will also follow you. That's easy. Cousin, if you come to my country, you won't do worse than Sapphire. Even the current Flame Archipelago has more fertile islands than Red Crab Island. If the Taro family was willing to give up Red Crab Island and seek refuge with him, it would naturally be a good thing. The Flame Archipelago was too big, and what he lacked the most was population. Even if he had followers and subjects, as well as the followers and subjects of the Tulip family, they might not even reach 800,000 people. It was simply terrifying to develop an archipelago of more than 5 million square kilometers with 800,000 people. The per capita area of the Flame Archipelago was more than 6.25 square kilometers. It should be known that the per capita area of China was only 0.0054 square kilometers. Therefore, he would open up a wide range of channels and not reject any knight who came to seek refuge with him, as long as they could bring people. However, the Taro family had been rooted in Red Crab Island for many years. It was not easy to run an industry, and they also had a relationship with Princess Angela. It was difficult for them to give up Sapphire. Mesiro would not make a stand easily. Only Roland Pinecone had decided to follow List to Flame Island in search of opportunities. List immediately said, Uncle Roland, if the Pinecone family is willing to cooperate with the development of Fiery Island, I can promise you the title of Count, and you can give your title to Cousin Raleigh. Viscount Roland and Aunt Melinda had two sons, Russell and Raleigh. Russell could inherit his father's title, while Raleigh had to establish his own business. Now, List not only promised the Pinecone family an Earl title, but also a Viscount title. The temptation was too great. Viscount Roland was very excited and even a little scared. The title of Count was his nightmare. List, I'm just an elite Earth Knight. Can I be promoted to Count? Under normal circumstances, only a Sky Knight can be promoted to Count. However, in my country I have the final say, so Uncle can be promoted to Count. After 3 generations, if the Pinecone family is still unable to cultivate a new Sky Knight heir, then according to the Knight system, they will be demoted to Viscount. List was very appreciative of this system where one would be demoted due to insufficient strength. He was not willing to raise a group of useless followers who would enjoy the resources of the fief, yet be mediocre and unable to even fight for military exploits. Don't worry, although I have no hope of becoming a Sky Knight in this lifetime, and Russell doesn't have the talent, the Pinecone family will use all its resources to cultivate a 3rd generation of Sky Knight successors. Since that is the case, after grandfather's funeral is over, Uncle will prepare to leave for Flame Island. Only by participating in the development of Flame Island as soon as possible can I properly bestow the title of Count to Uncle. Good. When this topic was over, Miopal couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, List, since you have 3 dragons, what is the other one? List smiled slightly. It's a secret for the time being. After staying in Long Taro Castle for one night, List left the next day. The funeral was set for July 15th. It was only the 7th, so there were still 8 days left. He just came here in advance to let people know his attitude of sheltering the Taro family. So he said goodbye to Mesiro and the others and returned to Black Horse Island with Ichi. He had planned to have a chat with the Oxtail Marquis, but the Oxtail Marquis had gone to the Oxtail territory, and even the Levis couple had gone with him. So he rested on Black Horse Island. Your Royal Highness, according to your instructions, Black Horse Island has been sorting out various industries. This is a list of industries to be transferred in 3 phases: short, medium, and long. Isaiah, the administrative officer of Algae City, sent a list to List. All the industries in the Flame territory were densely recorded, and each industry was marked with an approximate date of migration. As long as the Flame Island was gradually developed, these industries could be gradually transferred there. Eventually, a deserted territory was left and returned to the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, but the transfer of industries was not urgent. He would first take advantage of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire for a few years. In fact, List's intention was not to return Black Horse Island. He wanted to wait and see if Ichi could develop the magic transmission array as soon as possible with the help of the invisible dragon. Once the magic transmission array was properly studied and the transmission array from Black Horse Island to the Flame Island was established, the Sapphire Islands and the Flame Islands would be inseparable. It just so happened that List wanted to establish a kingdom. He could recruit the Sapphire family as his followers and make them loyal and pay tribute to him. I alone am enough to be the overlord of the sea. Grand Duke Andrew will not live long, and Anthony will certainly not be able to ride the Sapphire Dragon. I can accept him as a younger brother. In the beginning, Anthony wanted to accept Liszt as a younger brother. Now that Liszt was riding a dragon, he wanted to accept Anthony as a younger brother. He wanted to embrace the four seas and dominate the blue water. Sapphire was the nail that must be pulled out. He rested for a night. Liszt did not stay in Thorn Castle for long. Together with Ichi, he led the 10 large frame ships to the Whirlpool Islands and arrived at the Maelstrom a day later. So he continued to follow the previous action and smoothly crossed the 10 large frame ships to the Whirlpool Mountain of the Flame Island to support the construction of Infernal Town. On July 11th, he took Ichi to continue to the sea. This time he found the fleet of Duarte Red Apricots sailing on the vast sea. Ichi controlled the waterspout to help the fleet increase its speed, but because there were too many ships, she could not provide too high a speed. It took a full 3 days to send the fleet to the Whirlpool Islands. The fleet would leave a group of knight and serfs in the Whirlpool Islands to build the Whirlpool Town. The other part continued to sail, not through the Maelstrom, but along the nautical route to the Flame Islands, and eventually landed in the estuary area of the Whirlpool River. Along the Whirlpool River, they opened up a settlement and finally met up with Infernal Town. After sending the fleet to the Whirlpool Islands, Liszt left with Ichi and returned to Red Crab Island to attend the funeral of Marquis Merlin. Just as they arrived at Red Crab Island, Ichi took out her magic platform and prepared to contact the mages of Infernal Town to inquire about the progress of several experiments. Unexpectedly, she received a magic platform message from Black Horse Island. It turned out that the shipbuilders of the port town dock had been working on a new type of schooner. Costo and others were busy exploring the nautical data of the schooner. He could not help but summon the smoke mission to check the progress. Sure enough, he found that the mission had been completed. Chapter 827. Mission. There are priorities and there is an order to the construction. As the future ruler of a country, you should carefully consider your overall plans for the Flame Archipelago, the Whirlpool Archipelago and other territories instead of rushing here and there. Please plan the construction of the Flame Kingdom. Reward, Creative Magician. The smoke serpentines were dispersed by Liszt, but the content had been recorded in his mind. Leo flew him and Ichi to the Longtaro Castle. He took advantage of the rare leisure time to think about the smoke mission. For the time being, there was nothing to say about the reward of a creative magician. He didn't know which magician it referred to, nor did he know what creativity it was. When the mission was completed, the truth should come to light. What made him quite ashamed was the content of the mission. It turned out that he was asked to formulate a detailed construction outline of the Flame Kingdom, and to belittle his previous practice as hastily doing things hastily, and doing things hastily. Is this my own subconscious reflection, or is it because I heard others muttering behind my back? It was probably his own reflection because since he became the Dragon Knight, no one dared to refute anything he said. His followers all became yes-men and whatever he said was the truth. Even if some people felt that something was wrong, they did not dare to say it out loud. After all, the light of the Dragon Knight was too dazzling, and people did not dare to look directly at it. Although I have indeed become a little arrogant recently, there is no need to belittle my leadership abilities. I believe that the development of the Flame Archipelago is still relatively safe. Forget it, I am not someone who cannot be persuaded. I will let my followers discuss the general outline of the construction. One person is short, 2 people is long. Even if Liszt had the vision of modern civilization, it was inevitable that there would be omissions. Although he was elated in his heart, he did not swell to the extent of losing his mind. He immediately let Ichi take out the magic platform and send a message to the officials of the territory. Let them discuss in private how to develop the Flame Islands, Whirlpool Islands and other islands, and then all the senior officials will hand in a construction outline. His plan was to use these outlines to make up for the shortcomings, and finally perfect his own construction outline to complete the layout of the smoke mission. Skipping this matter. In the evening, the Longtaro Castle came into view. At this time, in the square in front of the castle, a large number of carriages were parked, all of which came to offer condolences. Liszt also saw the oxtail Marquis mount, the huge black albatross, strolling leisurely on the hillside not far away. Seeing the ferocious fire dragon flying in the distance, the black albatross suddenly recalled those difficult times. It clamped its legs and lay on the ground, not daring to move. There was no other reason. Liszt had once again indulged Leo to release more and more violent coercion. Ever since the eruption of the volcano on the Dodo Island, The temperature of Leo's dragon breath had suddenly risen, and his dragon's might had also greatly increased. He was no longer inferior to adult dragons such as the sapphire dragon and the light green gem dragon. After everyone felt the fire dragon's dragon might, List pretended to scold Leo for restraining his dragon might. Surrounded by a large number of nobles who came out of the Longtaro castle, List stepped into the castle. He first arranged for a Chi who did not like to socialize, to the study on the 4th floor, and then returned to the living room on the 2nd floor where the great nobles gathered to receive compliments and flattery. Although List would leave the Grand Duchy of Sapphire sooner or later, everyone knew the importance of building a good relationship with the Dragon Knight. Your Highness List. Eldest Prince Anthony, holding a cup of green tea, found a corner to chat with List. In his heart, Anthony was already regarded as a future younger brother, so List's attitude was more gentle. How is the Grand Duke? Father is well. He also asked me to send you his greetings. Thank you for your greetings, Grand Duke. Father asked me to tell you that if the Flame Lord has any needs, don't hesitate to ask him. The Sapphire family will do its best to help you establish your country. I do have some needs. I hope the Grand Duke can help me. Please say it. Put it aside for the time being. When I am fully prepared, I will communicate with the Grand Duke in detail. What List wanted to talk about was the sales channel for the light emeralds. For the time being, he did not have the ability to establish a set of sales channels for gems, so he hoped to use the Sapphire family's channels for sales. However, the news of the light emerald dragon had not yet leaked out, so he was not in a hurry to mention it. Alright then. But for the trade of sea salt, white paper and glass, I hope to change the way the profits are divided. How does your Highness want to change it? I hope to buy serfs from the Iron and Steel Ridge, pay for the serf trade with the profits from the trade, and then transport the serfs back to Iron Heel City through the Sapphire family's channels. The price of serfs in the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom is far higher than that in the Eagle Kingdom. Yes, it is indeed very expensive. Flowing into the Grand Duchy of Sapphire is about 2 or 3 times more expensive than the serfs in the Eagle Kingdom. But it doesn't matter, I will pay for it and the Sapphire family only needs to provide the channels. List said lightly, exuding an air of not lacking money. Anthony nodded. This is naturally no problem. The Sapphire family has always kept the serf channels in the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom. But why doesn't your Highness use the serfs of the Eagle Kingdom? In his opinion, the serfs of the Eagle Kingdom were very cheap. In any case, serfs were used everywhere, so of course they should be used cheaply. However, List did not think so. Most of the serfs and knight in his territory came from the Eagle Kingdom, and over time, it was easy to form a tendency. Although he was not worried about the loyalty of his followers, if the Eagle Kingdom wanted to intervene, it was indeed easy to cause civil strife. So he wanted to take in a group of serfs from the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom to break the mark of the Eagle Kingdom. But when the words came to his mouth, he changed his words. I will naturally plunder the Eagle Kingdom, but the population in the coastal hinterland is far from enough for my needs, so I need to open up the serf market in the Iron and Steel Ridge ahead of time. The population in the coastal hinterland of the Eagle Kingdom is tens of millions. Isn't that enough? I may be able to plunder 1/10 of them, but not all of them will wait there for me to plunder at will. When the Eagle Kingdom comes to their senses, they will definitely migrate the lords and subjects of the coastal hinterland inland. I don't want to make a small fuss like the annual expansion order. The expansion order of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire was to take advantage of the annual war between the Iron and Steel Ridge and the Eagle Kingdom to drink some meat soup. However, List wanted to rely on his 3 dragons to forcibly tear off pieces of meat. After 2 or 3 tearing, the Eagle Kingdom would probably either launch a dragon-slaying war or give up the coastal hinterland. It was absolutely impossible to let him come and tear off pieces of meat at will every year. It was a pity that the Flame Island was poor and could not sustain the influx of too many people. Otherwise, List might have planned to get rid of the population in the coastal hinterland once and for all. In any case, if the Flame Kingdom wanted to develop, it must suck blood from the legendary continent. He was not a slow person. 10,000 years was too long and he had to seize every minute. Anthony heard this and suddenly became embarrassed. Your Highness List, if you crazily plunder the Eagle Kingdom, wouldn't it be difficult to maintain the annual expansion order of Sapphire? Chapter 828. I need to report back to my father. Anthony did not give any answer to List's proposal. He needed to discuss it carefully with the Sapphire Grand Duke before he could answer. List nodded. It's just a proposal. There is still some time before this year's expansion order. The Grand Duke can think about it slowly. I personally am very willing to facilitate this kind of cooperation. When the Eagle Kingdom is weak, we should take out thunderous means to accelerate its decline. Your Royal Highness, please rest assured that when the funeral of Marquis Merlin is over, I will immediately return to the Blue Sky Mountain Palace and bring all your words to my father. Very well. Liszt picked up the teacup and took a sip of the slightly bitter tea. The green tea trees of Black Horse Island were exclusively owned. After a long period of cultivation they had a high yield. Because he, the Dragon Knight, drank tea every day, he quickly led to the atmosphere of Sapphire. The great nobles would buy a batch of tea from Black Horse Island and go back to brew and taste it. Even the Sapphire family had ordered a lot of tea from Black Horse Island. It was said that the Grand Duke liked tea very much, which added to the tea-drinking atmosphere of Sapphire. Of course, how many people really liked tea, Liszt did not care. He originally just wanted to drink tea. Even if a caddy of tea was sold for a few gold coins, he did not see the profit from tea. Sea salt, white paper and glass had always been the three pillars of trade in the Flame territory. There was no drinking at the dinner, just a simple meal. This was proposed by Liszt. He thought that it was not appropriate to drink during the funeral of Marquis Merlin. In fact, Sapphire did not have a rule that alcohol was not allowed during the funeral, but Liszt personally felt that the atmosphere of drinking was too high and not appropriate. The Dragon Knight had made a request, and the nobles were naturally embarrassed to mention it again. So after a quick dinner they went back to rest. Liszt found an opportunity to talk to the Marquis Oxtail alone. Father, let's go to the study to talk. Well, I also have a lot of questions to ask you. Should I participate? Levis asked enthusiastically. He was keen to participate in family events. Liszt nodded. Of course you can participate. But you have to make sure that the study is quiet enough in case someone else hears our conversation. In the study, Achi was still reading and writing, minding her own business. She only said goodbye to Lee William and then immersed herself in her own world again. She was busy researching the teleportation magic matrix, throwing all other experiments aside and striving to complete the teleportation magic matrix as soon as possible. Liszt took the red wine and glass from the servant's hand, indicating that he would do it himself. After the servant closed the door, Levis also went out to take a look. He instructed his squire not to let anyone disturb him, and then returned to his study. He took the glass of red wine from Liszt and said, "There's no one outside. Liszt, you can say what you want to say now." Liszt sat on the chair and asked, "Father, have you heard about it from Uncle?" William nodded solemnly. "Messiro told me about the three-headed dragon. I couldn't sleep last night because of this news. When he arrived at Longtaro Castle yesterday, Messiro told him about it. At that time he only felt that Messiro was making fun of him. It took him a long time to reluctantly accept the truth, but he was still skeptical. The same was true for Levis. I indeed have the three-headed dragon. This is the basis of my plan to directly establish a kingdom. The Flame Kingdom will be established on the sea. I believe that no other kingdom would dare to casually launch a dragon-slaying war against the Flame Kingdom. As for the location of the Flame Kingdom, I have already chosen the location, Flame Islands." Without waiting for William and Levis to respond, Liszt took out a drawn map from his bosom. He spread it out and said, "This is the map of the Flame Islands. It is about 7,000 kilometers away from the Sapphire Islands. It is a bit far, but it is not a big obstacle. Father, please take a look. The largest island is the Flame Island. It will be the direct territory of my Flame family." Not having the time to express his shock at the three-headed dragon, William immediately looked at the map in the direction of Liszt's finger. "How big is this island?" After surveying, "It is about 3 million square kilometers." 3 million? Isn't it bigger than the Sapphire Islands combined? Yes. Liszt smiled proudly. Being able to find the Flame Islands was indeed something to be proud of. The Flame Island is the territory of the Flame family. Therefore, the second largest island in the Flame Islands is Tulip Island. I have already named this island as a fief to the Tulip family. How big is it? Levis asked impatiently. About 450,000 square kilometers. It is half the size of the Ironhoof Island. 450,000. Levis's eyes lit up. He instantly felt very excited about this island that was much smaller than the Flame Island. Liszt, when do you plan to establish a kingdom and develop the Flame Islands? What do you think, Father? Liszt decided to ask for William's opinion first. Rubbing his chin, the ox-tailed Marquis forced himself to calm down. After examining the map seriously, he slowly said, "Developing the islands before establishing a kingdom is my idea. The Flame Islands are still an unknown environment. The resources on the islands have yet to be explored. It is hard to guarantee that it will be suitable for living. He paused for a moment before continuing, moreover, the Sapphire Islands are too far away from the Flame Islands. Without sufficient preparation, the resources spent on the journey might be wasted. Our family's industry is still very weak. If we rashly go to the Flame Islands to cultivate, we might lose more than we gain. Father, we have the same idea. However, we still need to develop the islands. We can first send a batch of knight there. I will recruit a knight from the Iron Hoof City. Father, you can also recruit a knight. You can recruit all the knight eliminated from the Sapphire Islands and send them to the Flame Islands to develop the lands. An Earth Knight could be promoted as long as they ate more meat. Most of the trainee knights could not be counted. However, there were very few knight who could truly make a name for themselves. Most knight would eventually have to put down their spears, sell their warhorses and go back to farming or doing odd jobs. All the knight could see the opportunity in List's sudden appearance. Those who were unwilling would definitely risk their lives for him. He would not force them. After explaining the dangers and benefits of developing the lands, the rest would depend on the knight's own will. Lee William nodded and said, "That's possible. The Iron Hoof Island lacks everything except for the knight." With the destruction of the Bull family, many knight were forced to dismount and farm. That's right, Father. Although I will focus on developing the deserted islands of the Flame Islands for the next few years, I am not in a hurry to establish a kingdom. However, the structure of the Flame Kingdom's court needs to be determined as soon as possible. Father, what can you teach me? List asked. The national system under the knight system was very different from the national system on Earth. Firstly, as a feudal system, the feudal lord was the greatest ruler of the fief. Other than paying taxes to the superior feudal lord, all other affairs were handled by the feudal lord himself. Even the real royal court was more responsible for managing the king's own fief and coordinating the feudal lords under him. Before List was enfeoffed as the Marquis of Oxtail, his position was that of a groom in the palace. This position looked like a servant's position, but in fact, the positions that the nobles held in the palace were basically similar honorary positions, such as the head of the catering department, the Minister of Internal Affairs, the wine master, the groom. As for the Minister of Finance, Minister of Military Affairs and the like, there were no similar positions. The main administrative positions of the king's territory would be held by small vassal nobles. Cities and towns would be managed by consultants, administrative officers and the like. The war would be handled by the orders of chivalry. Unless it was an elite knight that was specially trained, most knight could support themselves and did not need the worry of the feudal lord. The commander of the orders of chivalry would be chosen from among the great nobles and would be responsible for organizing the chaotic knight for the kingdom. Before retiring, Marquis Merlin served as the captain of the court fleet, which was equivalent to the commander of the orders of chivalry on land. The Marquis was the leader of each large-scale orders of chivalry. List participated in the first two orders of chivalry and the Battle of Iron Hoof Island. Although he and Lee William participated in the war in the name of the Coral Island Orders of Chivalry, they were still under the command of the commander of the large-scale orders of chivalry, who presided over the war. Chapter 829. He didn't get any useful suggestions from the Marquis of Oxtail. List's father's vision had been limited by the knight system. His three views were formed and stable, and he couldn't see anything that needed to be improved. It was still the usual system in the legendary continent. The king would manage the king's territory, and the nobles would manage the nobles' territories. They would fight together and divide the spoils together. Then they would return to their homes and find their own mothers. The king wasn't like the king. He was essentially just a leader. The advancement of this system was undoubtedly poor, but it was suitable for the current productivity conditions. After the Marquis of Oxtail and his son left, List leaned back in his chair, still thinking about this problem. When he had just transmigrated, he was ambitious and thought about changing the social system. He wanted to change the feudal system into a centralized system where all the power would be concentrated in the hands of the king. However, the reform of the system couldn't be completed in a day. If China did not have Emperor Qin Shi Huang's grand ambition of working hard for 6 generations, reinvigorating the empire and ruling the universe, it would also be difficult to centralize power. Moreover, in List's current opinion, both the feudal system and the centralized system were backward. He really couldn't tell if the feudal system was more comfortable or the centralized system was more comfortable. As a dragon-rearing family at the top of the pyramid, and a family rearing many dragons, he would live comfortably no matter what. The people and I will not play with a better system. I can't be so fearless as to shake my own power for no reason. He shook his head silently. How could a person who had tasted the beauty of power let go of this feeling and display his noble sentiments? After a while he made a decision. There's no motivation for reform now. I'll copy the system of the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom and continue to maintain the feudal system. When the Fire Kingdom grows stronger and my personal strength reaches the peak, I can reform with invincible momentum if I want to centralize power. I believe no one will dare to stop me. However, when he looked at the map of the Fire Islands on the table, he suddenly laughed. He felt that he had been worrying for nothing. The Fire Islands were about 5 million square kilometers, and the Fire Island occupied more than 3 million square kilometers. This meant that even if he gave away the rest of the islands, his territory as the king would still be boundless. A third of the area of China was enough for his family to prosper. Whether it was enfeoffment or centralization of power, it was all the same. When the productivity of Blazing Island flourished under his development, even if List did not take the initiative to reform the system, it would sprout on its own. Even if he continued to infect people, the nobles who had been infected might cry and beg to stay on Flame Island to become officials after seeing the richness of Flame Island. Furthermore, if one day he could contract a fairy dragon and become immortal, the next day, on the 15th of July, Marquis Merlin's funeral was held in a light drizzle. There was no overly grand ceremony, nor was there any noise of gongs and drums. Many nobles rode on carriages and followed the orders of chivalry, who were guarding the coffin, to the cemetery of the Taro family. The grave had already been dug, and the inscription on the tombstone had already been erected. It was a square tombstone that wasn't too big. On it were the words, Marquis of Red Crab Island, Merlin Long Taro, Glory Year 71 April 18th, Glory Year 154 July 3rd in serpentines. Glory was birth and glory was death. The inscription on the monument was very simple. There wasn't even the name of the person who erected the monument. But there was a line of small words below. To life, to death, give a cold glance, the night gallops past. This was the epitaph that Marquis Merlin had thought of a long time ago. Before he died in peace, he had already ordered people to engrave this tombstone and bury it above the cemetery where he was about to sleep. List held a tulip flower in his hand and stood in front of the tombstone, letting the rain fall on the frac abier and wet his clothes. Thinking about Marquis Merlin's past, even though it had been more than 10 days since his death, his mood was still bleak. If there were no accidents, he would have waited until this day to turn into white bones and accompany the yellow earth. He once thought that he was not afraid of death, but at this moment he was more eager to contract a fairy dragon. Watching Marquis Merlin's coffin being buried in the earth, his desire grew stronger. He never wanted to be buried in the earth one day. The atmosphere of the entire cemetery was very quiet. All the nobles did not make a sound, but quietly meditated and prayed. When the cemetery servants filled the earth and placed pots of flowers, an old aristocrat at the scene coughed softly. He was Marquis Merlin's distant cousin Memi Long Taro. Although his title was only that of an ordinary baron, he was old enough to be invited by Masilo to serve as the funeral master. The old aristocrat waited for everyone to pay attention to him before slowly saying, "The Marquis of Red Crab Island, the pillar of the Taro family, Merlin Long Taro, rests here. The funeral has been completed. Next, I would like to invite all the guests to make a circle around the cemetery in order to offer flowers and bid a final farewell to Merlin Long Taro." Flowers were a symbol of beauty. Many aristocrats used flowers as their surname. Offering flowers to the deceased was one of the few important parts of a funeral. As the Dragon Knight and Arch-Wizard with the highest status, List and Achi stepped forward together and gently placed the tulip flower in front of the tombstone. The Masilo couple and the Miopal couple, who were standing at the side of the cemetery, slightly bowed to the two with sad expressions on their faces to express their gratitude. List and Achi also slightly bowed in return, then walked around the cemetery and left the cemetery under the guidance of the servants. Immediately after him, the noble guests offered flowers and then left the cemetery. In this simple manner, Marquis Merlin's funeral was completed. The rain was still pattering down. List refused the retainer knight's action of holding an umbrella for him. He directly took the umbrella and held it by himself. Together with Achi, they stepped on the soaked bluestone slabs and slowly walked towards Long Taro Castle. He did not walk too fast. Behind him, Anthony and the other aristocrats could only follow slowly. No one rashly went up to disturb them, leaving ample space for List and Achi to chat. The Dragon Knight's handsome face had a trace of disappointment. "If I can't get the method to form a contract with the Dragon Domain Lord in a few decades, I will probably be lying in the mud in the darkness like grandfather. Achi wrinkled her delicate nose, but Achi can still live for many years. Then live well and protect my family. No, Achi wants to be with Big Brother, I don't want to be separated. Life and death are decreed by fate, wealth and honor are determined by heaven. People always have moments of sorrow and joy, just like the moon in the sky, waxes and wanes, growing and multiplying endlessly. List said with a sigh. Although he was determined to form a contract with a fairy dragon, and even if he could not find one, no one could guarantee that the contract would be successful. However, no one could guarantee that the contract would succeed. So many kings had died, but none of them had succeeded. So far, there were rumors on the legendary continent that the Emperor of the Unsetting Light Empire had been in power for more than 200 years. Obviously he was a dragon domain lord. However, it was difficult to distinguish whether the news was true or false. The Unsetting Light Empire was too far away from the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, and there was almost no intersection. Of course, as long as there was a trace of possibility, List would fight for it. At worst, he would ride the invisible dragon and rush into the palace of the Unsetting Light Empire and find the Emperor to talk about the contract with the Dragon Domain Lord. In short, who would want to die if they could live forever? Achi did not know what List was thinking, but she said very seriously, "Don't worry, Big Brother, Achi will research the method to form a contract with the Dragon Domain Lord, so that Big Brother can also live for a few hundred years, until we don't want to live anymore." List smiled. "Okay, I look forward to it." Chapter 830. After the funeral of Marquis Merlin, List did not stay in Longtaro Castle for long. The next day he returned to Black Horse Island with Achi. Compared with other aristocrats who need to sail slowly by boat, he sailed at the speed of sound in Achi's shell, crossing the Sapphire Archipelago like crossing the city's second ring road. When he returned to the territory, the first thing he did was to ride the Chocobo Loki, patrol the territory, and find the increasingly fat seven-colored whale Lolth to swim in the sea. It was a hot and dry summer, and it was very comfortable to swim in the sea. The Thunder Dragon turtle raised by Achi has become the guardian beast of Black Horse Island, lying on the beach near Kelp Town for half of the day. Then it enjoys a large number of delicious dried fish sent by the servants of Thorn Castle. It is not that it does nothing. As a Thunder Attribute Super Dragon, its body will naturally condense high Thunder Attribute magic around it, forming a natural training ground rich in Thunder Attribute magic. Many Thunder Attribute Knight in the territory practice around it. These knights are very young. They are the reserve knight of the Burning Orders of Chivalry that List cultivated for himself. Sapphire Grand Duke has the famous Blue Blood Orders of Chivalry. As his direct core, List naturally cannot do without his own core. In the future, the Burning Orders of Chivalry will continue to grow and expand, and will gradually develop into an aristocratic meritorious group like the Blue Blood Alliance. The huge foundation of the Flame family has been guarded for generations. The black-blooded horse herd is well raised. The black-blooded mixed horses can be used to arm the territory orders of chivalry. The black-blooded purebred horses have also developed from dozens to more than 200 now. When these foals grow up and continue to improve the breed, they will eventually be able to develop into dragon horses like the blue blood horses. The black-blooded horses are slightly smaller than the blue blood horses. Although they are both dragon horses, they are not as good as the blue blood horses in all aspects. However, under the guidance of List's eugenics, good breeding and scientific horse-raising policy, sooner or later, stronger black blood horses could be cultivated to arm the Burning Orders of Chivalry. It's a pity that the Flying Dust Dogs haven't been able to breed any new female beasts that can give birth, and there's no clue as to how to form the Blizzard Orders of Chivalry. Goldie, Little Red, and Little Purple also don't have a partner, and it's difficult for the Fire Dragon birds to develop. The Personal Guard Orders of Chivalry seems to be an extravagant hope. In fact, even the Fire Demon Swordsman cultivation system hasn't been organized yet. The Burning Orders of Chivalry was a collective term, and there was bound to be an ordinary knight and an elite knight. Just as the Blue Blood Orders of Chivalry had the elite Mahuiing Orders of Chivalry, the Burning Orders of Chivalry would also be divided into the elite Blizzard Orders of Chivalry, as well as the elite Personal Guard Orders of Chivalry. The Blizzard Orders of Chivalry were designed to use the Blizzard Beast as a mount, and the Personal Guard Orders of Chivalry were designed to have the Fire Demon Swordsman ride the Fire Dragon birds. It was a pity that the Fire Demon Swordsman's cultivation principles were basically clear, but the specific details still needed to be scrutinized, and Leo's cooperation also needed to be explored. He felt that his brain power was not enough to perfect it, and Ichi didn't have time to worry about this experiment, so he put it aside. My foundation is still too shallow, and it's difficult to achieve it overnight. List looked at the thunder dragon turtle basking in the sun on the beach not far away, and sighed slightly in his heart. As the smoke mission said, his character was indeed full of the exaggeration of doing things quickly. But there were some things that couldn't be rushed. The blizzard beast can't reproduce, the fire dragon bird is difficult to form, and the thunder dragon turtle doesn't seem to have any hope of becoming a tool to pull the ship. The only thing worth celebrating is that the super dragon beasts are of great benefit to the knight's cultivation. This group of thunder attribute knight training around the thunder dragon turtle has made obvious progress. When Goldie, Little Red and Little Purple grew up, they could also provide a place for the fire attribute knight to train. Of course, the effect of training next to the fire dragon Leo was even greater, but the nobility of dragons would never allow small ants to surround them. Withdrawing his gaze, List touched the rainbow whale Lolth under his crotch and sighed softly. Good mounts are really hard to find. The chocobo Loki and the rainbow whale Lolth probably don't have similar breeds, and there's no way to breed them. It's easier to find some super dragon beasts to train as followers. Thus, he remembered the clues about the super dragon beasts from Kenley Truth. The Earth attribute Golden Goat was raised by the Iron and Steel Ridge royal family, and it was obviously very difficult to obtain it. There was also a subdragon called the Eagle, which was raised by a duke's family in the Iron and Steel Ridge that had given birth to a dragon knight, but it had never been seen. The most likely to be obtained was the unicorn. High-level dragon Pegasus were distributed in the Pegasus forest, and it was said that some people had seen a unicorn among the Pegasus. The Pegasus is a high-level wind dragon beast. If the unicorn is similar to the thunder dragon turtle and the dragon turtle, then it should be a wind super dragon beast. According to the naming rules of the World of Warcraft Encyclopedia, it should be called Storm Pegasus, more in line with its identity. Whether it was a Storm Pegasus or a unicorn, List had decided that when he had time, he would go to the Pegasus forest with Ichi and search for it. The results of patrolling the territory were pretty good. 3 more sprite worms were obtained, namely the wheat sprite worm, the hemp rope rattan worm, and the tomato sprite worm, in addition to the wheat sprite worm and corn sprite worm discovered and reported by the serfs. During this time, the territory had produced 5 sprite worms in succession, all of which had high economic value, which was worth celebrating. Big data proved it. Scientific farming had an extremely efficient effect on the breeding of sprite worms. Relying on this discovery as well as the long-term exploration of farming methods in the territory, it could be foreseen that in the future, the Kingdom of Fire would usher in a continuous outbreak of sprites and its national power would soar exponentially. After patrolling the territory, after dealing with the accumulated official business, after resting in the Thorns Castle for a few days, List quickly collected the construction outline written by his high-ranking officials and carefully looked at it. Discarding the dregs and selecting the essence, and then drawing on the strong points of others, he wrote his own outline of the Kingdom of Fire's Year 05 construction year. As for why it was the year 05, it was because he planned to complete the establishment of the country within these 5 years. Since the country had yet to be established, it naturally could not be classified as the year 05. In short, List's obsessive-compulsive disorder flared up, or a certain muscle in his brain twitched. The outline could be summed up in 16 words. Black Horse, continue to develop, Flame Whirlpool, fully develop, Surf Trade, Night Pioneering, Infrastructure Construction, Industrial Transfer. The specifics were further subdivided into multiple development steps. This was a relatively detailed and solid construction outline that took into account the needs of all aspects. It would play a strategic guiding role in the establishment of the Kingdom of Fire. As long as it was strictly implemented, the country would be smoothly established within 5 years. When the copy of the outline was completed, the smoke mission was also completed. Mission completed. Reward, Creative Wizard Inuit Truth. Inuit Truth? I have heard of this name. Just 2 days ago when inspecting the dock, a wizard had mixed into the sailing team. It seems that he is a young wizard with aspirations to sail. List quickly learned which wizard was the reward of the smoke mission. The day after he returned to the territory, Costo and the others returned to test the new type of schooner. After sea tests they obtained detailed data on the schooner. In terms of speed, which he was most concerned about, the advantage was not as obvious as List imagined. Especially when the wind was favorable, the schooner was difficult to control. But when the wind was against the wind, the speed advantage of the schooner was perfectly demonstrated. Unless it was directly against the wind, the schooner could rely on the sea breeze to sail. Of course, when the wind was too strong or the wind was too strong, it was still very difficult for the schooner to sail. Liszt was not satisfied with the performance of the schooner. He thought that the schooner could replace the horizontal sailing ship, but now it seemed that it could not. Chapter 831. Inuit's words reminded Liszt that horizontal sails and longitudinal sails were both types of sails. A large ship could have 2 or 3 masts, so why couldn't it hang horizontal sails and longitudinal sails at the same time? When the wind was favorable, the horizontal sails would be raised and the ship would roar. When the wind was adverse, the longitudinal sails would be raised and the ship would move like a snake. In this way, a sailboat could move freely on the sea at any time, which would greatly shorten the sailing time. Moreover, Liszt seemed to have some impression of the age of great navigation on Earth. There were many sailboats with triangular longitudinal sails at the bow and stern, and horizontal sails in the middle. It was after listening to Inuit's suggestion that Liszt immediately ordered the shipyard shipbuilders to work hard on a hybrid sailboat. However, Liszt didn't care much about Inuit's suggestion to use wood to fix the sails because it was rejected by several old shipbuilders at the time and considered unrealistic. Now it seems that I have to have a good talk with this creative magician. To be able to get the recognition of the smoke mission and involve the power of fate, this person should be a talented person. The power of fate represented by the smoke mission was very mysterious and mysterious. So far, Liszt had not figured out the root cause. But it was undeniable that the people who could be selected by the smoke mission would always have something unusual and special. In plain words, these people were probably equivalent to the children of fate, surrounded by the protagonist aura. Of course, no matter how strong their aura was, it was not as strong as Liszt's chi. Emily was talented in chi, Lucy and Ruth were talented in magic, Paris was a light magic swordsman. Chi was a rare siren in the world and became a magic shooter with the body of a siren. Inuit's talent was still unclear. Liszt needed to pay serious attention to it. Soon, Inuit Truth was led by a retainer knight. He was not a magician who followed the rules. The magic cloak seemed to have been modified by him into a set of tights. "Your Royal Highness, you were looking for me? Inuit, do you like sailing?" Liszt motioned for the other party to sit down and then asked casually. "Yes, Your Highness. I grew up by the sea and have yearned for the blue sea since I was young." Information about Inuit had already been presented to Liszt. It was transferred directly from the Guild of Magic. Every mage would provide detailed identity information when they joined the guild. Finally, they would be issued an identity card similar to an ID card. Each Black Horse Island citizen had one. Inuit was a sapphire person, but he was a magician from the outer island. He followed his teacher to Black Horse Island. His teacher was just an ordinary mage who was currently studying nature magic with the great mage Lars Truth, which was the druid's farming and transformation. He did not like to study magic that was too theoretical. Instead, he was passionate about sailing. Liszt knocked on the table and asked, "Do you have any other inspirations for improving the sailboat?" Inuit replied with slight excitement, "Your Royal Highness, I have been studying sailboats for a long time, and I have a lot of designs that I want to show off. I've communicated with the shipbuilders at the shipyard before, but they are too inflexible. They don't let go of the rigid shipbuilding techniques and don't understand my design at all." "Then tell me now." "Yes, Your Royal Highness." Once he started talking, Inuit couldn't stop and told him all about his sailboat design. These designs ranged from sails, masts, suspension ropes to hull structure. Many of the contents were really whimsical, and even Liszt found it a little difficult to understand. There were also some designs that, in Liszt's opinion, were pure nonsense. For example, Inuit felt that the work of retracting the sails was very heavy. He simply designed the mast to be foldable so that when a storm came, the mast could be directly lowered to both sides. It could also be used as a hull support to keep the ship stable on the sea and never sink. Strictly speaking, this idea was very interesting. However, the mast itself was the most important part of a sailboat. It was necessary to select ironwood of the same quality as the keel as the mast, so that the mast would not break. Once the foldable mast encountered a storm, the mast itself would probably be the first to break. Moreover, the sails were very heavy. Once the mast was folded, it would definitely be more tiring to erect it than to raise the sails. Moreover, how to ensure the stability of the hull when the mast was raised and folded was also a huge problem. In short, it was unreliable. Most of Inuit's designs were similarly unreliable. However, from his creative design, Liszt found an interesting content. Inuit actually proposed to use a huge rotating wheel to drive the ship forward. This was simply the design of a ship. On Earth, the era of sailing boats was replaced by steam-powered ships and gradually reduced to a kind of sailing competition. Have you ever thought about how much strength would be needed to move a ship with a huge wheel that propels it forward? And how much strength would it take to turn such a wheel? List asked with great interest. Inuit seemed that he already had a plan in mind. Your Royal Highness, although manpower can't push such a big wheel to rotate, but the power of magic can. We can use a magic array to drive the wheel to rotate. Use a magic array to drive? This was a very good solution, but List was not satisfied. The magic array is indeed widely used. It is not impossible to drive the wheel to rotate. But the production and consumption of the magic array is huge. It is not suitable to use it on a ship. This idea of combining magic and technology, he had thought about it a long time ago. However, with the shrinking of the magic network, it was difficult for the magic array to absorb magic through the magic network. It all needed to consume the magic of the magic array materials themselves. To maintain such a magic array operation, the consumption was huge. In this world, there was no such thing as a spirit stone to store magic power. Even a small magic platform often needed to change the magic rune operation materials, and the cost of communication was not small, not to mention driving the huge wheel to rotate. This. Inuit suddenly became embarrassed. As a magician, he was very clear about the value of magic materials. His idea was indeed very creative, which made him feel proud of himself. But according to his design, it was possible that a single magic array could buy several three-masted sailboats. Coupled with the materials needed to maintain the magic array, he was afraid that such a ship would make a loss for one trip. Only a fool would design such a thing. Looking at the embarrassed Inuit, List did not show any disappointment. On the contrary, he valued Inuit very much. Not only because of the smoke mission but also because of Inuit's idea. If you want to develop technology, you are not afraid of the idea being difficult to realize, but afraid of not having the idea. Inuit, the power of magic is difficult to apply to the people, but this does not mean that there is no power that can replace magic. There is a power I call steam. You can study this direction. In addition, I can't judge the value of some of your ideas on the sailboat, but I can let you participate in the design of the new sailboat. Are you willing? Inuit immediately replied, "Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for your recognition. Of course I am willing to participate in the design of the new sailboat." Personally designing a sailboat to sail the sea, Inuit was more than happy, but he still had doubts in his heart. "Your Royal Highness, what does the power of steam mean?" "You go back and boil a pot of water, you will understand the power of steam." List pretended to be mysterious. In fact, he did not know much about the steam engine, the killing machine that set off the Industrial Revolution. He only knew that it used coal, oil and other raw materials to burn, and then pushed the piston to do work, driving the machine to operate. "Boil water, I will go back and boil water." Inuit hurriedly left. Looking at his back, List shook his head. The steam engine probably could not set off the Industrial Revolution in this world. The reason was very simple. So far he had never heard of coal, oil and other fossil fuels. Without this fuel, burning wood alone would not provide much of a source of power. The lack of metal would also seriously limit the manufacture of the steam engine. Of course, the steam engine did not have no development potential. The reason was also very simple. List had a fire dragon. When the small fire dragon grew up, the fire dragon could be released at will. At that time, there would be a steady stream of magic for the small fire dragon as fuel. Then he could go to the legendary continent and rob a few iron mines. Chapter 832. Anthony Sapphire brought bad news to List. List proposed to join forces with the Sapphire family to do something big, but was declined by the Sapphire Grand Duke because of the friction between the Blast Furnace Kingdom and the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom. This year's development order may not be issued as desired. The Eagle Kingdom has promised many benefits to the Blast Furnace Kingdom and successfully provoked a confrontation between the Blast Furnace Kingdom and the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom. 6 Dragon Knight have been assembled in the border area between the two countries. As a result, the pressure on the border of the Eagle Kingdom has suddenly weakened, and they can free their hands to defend the coastal hinterland. What a pity. List did not insist. The Grand Duchy of Sapphire is known as the Overlord of the Sea, but in fact, it is just a Grand Duchy. Seeing that there is no opportunity, it retreated. As for List, he was not stupid enough to go to the Eagle Kingdom alone to plunder. Whether it was him, the small fire dragon Leo, or the invisible dragon Bard, they all needed time to grow. The light emerald dragon Isin had not fully recovered from his injuries. With such combat power he could bully an ordinary knight, but he was not confident enough to fight against a dragon knight, so it was better to focus on developing Flame Island. He laid his cards on the table to Anthony. The Sapphire family should worry about the surf trade. You should have heard about the Flame Islands. I am starting to develop it and will leave Sapphire at any time. Anthony nodded and said, yes, we already know about this news. You and Marquis Oxtail's night movements have not been concealed. I have not been able to fully investigate the development of the Flame Islands for the time being, so the migration of the country will be postponed for a few years. I hope the Grand Duke can continue to support us in the next few years. Your Highness, please rest assured that the Sapphire family will fully support the Flame family in establishing a country. That's good. It's rare for you to come to Black Horse Island. Stay for a few days and enjoy the island's food. After Anthony left with a mouth full of grease, List and Achi also set off from Black Horse Island, sailing to the Whirlpool Islands with the third batch of frame ships. After the materials were transported to Fire Town, he called the Invisible Dragon Bard and studied the magic transmission array with Achi all day long. The reason he was so enthusiastic. It was because of the new smoke mission. The Great Maelstrom Magic Transmission Array has gradually become clear under the research of the Siren Achi and can be experimented on. This is a major scientific research project in the future. Why not help Achi with the Invisible Dragon to complete the first experiment? Reward, deep understanding of the weave. This mission meant that Achi's research had entered a new stage. The contents of the reward were fairly interesting, similar to the one from the Great Maelstrom. That time, the reward was a profound understanding of the teleportation formation. This time, it was a profound understanding of the weave. There was no doubt that this reward had attracted him. He had studied the weave countless times and asked Achi more than once. However, other than knowing that the weave was a special existence similar to a field and a net that enveloped the entire world, drifting between matter and magic, possessing high-energy magic and the ability to interfere with reality, he didn't know anything else. However, there was no doubt that the magic net was an important part of this world. If he wanted to surpass the Dragon Knight's cultivation system, he would definitely have to attack the magic net. Therefore this reward could not be missed. Achi, can we start the experiment? Are there any mistakes? At the entrance of the Maelstrom Mountain, List looked at Achi, who was constantly directing the knight and the sorcerers to set up the experiment equipment, and couldn't help but ask nervously. Brother, Achi has repeatedly demonstrated the operation steps of the observation of matter magic nodes experiment. With Bard's help, there shouldn't be any accidents. All right. Time passed quickly and it was now August, which was unbearably hot. After a week, countless magic arrays set up by Achi around the entrance of the Maelstrom Cave were finally completed, completely enveloping the entrance of the Maelstrom Cave. When all the knight and sorcerers had left the entrance of the Maelstrom Cave, only Achi, List, and the Invisible Dragon Bard were left there. Bard couldn't wait any longer. He used his ability to provide information for the experiment at all times, and through List's communication, he understood the content and purpose of the observation of matter magic nodes experiment. The purpose was to create an opportunity for him to observe the boundary of the material world. Only by observing the boundary of the material world could he tear the boundary, look for the left and open the magic transmission array. Brother, let's begin. Achi nodded. List tossed aside all of his chaotic emotions and leapt onto the Dragonfang platform on the back of the Invisible Dragon Bard. He quickly entered Dragon Rider Resonance and entered Dragon Rider mode. Achi, on the other hand, constantly activated the complex magic arrays at the entrance of the cave. These magic arrays gradually flickered with a complex magic light, and countless amounts of magic began to converge at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, List felt his body begin to swell. To be precise, Bard's body began to swell. The magic of the magic arrays guided into his body, helping him to rapidly increase his strength in a short period of time. However, the magic was too heterogeneous and needed to be refined and condensed. Bard himself didn't have this ability. List had already fused the Invisible Dragon's spatial magic with his dragon's chi, quickly fusing these magic into one through high-speed movement. With him acting as the switch of magic, the Invisible Dragon could calmly accept the stimulation of magic, and its strength skyrocketed. His body began to grow. Originally, it was only 15 meters long and 15 meters wingspan, but it directly swelled to 20 meters long and 20 meters wingspan. This was roughly the size of its adult body. An adult invisible dragon. The crystal white field of vision was also constantly changing from a rough world of crystal structure to a fine world of crystal structure. Coupled with List's crystal white trajectory, the world he saw was even more peculiar. It was as if every trace of matter and every trace of magic was decomposed into the finest crystal structure. The magic arrays were still activated, and more magic filled the entrance of the vortex cave. List, who was immersed in the surging power of the invisible dragon and the novel vision, suddenly heard Ichi's clear shout, "Brother, start guiding the magic to carry out high-frequency resonance, strip off matter, and find the node of the material boundary." Understood. List suddenly sobered up from his power. He operated the dragon's chi, and the invisible dragon's spatial magic quickly integrated into the surrounding environment, beginning to display its power to dominate space. The wings flapped and magic surged. The space inside the vortex cave swayed like water waves, and with the continuous surging of the invisible dragon's power, the material boundary invisible to the naked eye was gradually stripped away, revealing the scene outside the boundary. At the same time, a looming wormhole space began to reveal itself. "Let's work harder, Bard," List shouted, and together with the invisible dragon, frantically operated the dragon's chi. The power of space constantly tore at the material boundary, and finally, with a loud bang, the material boundary was forcibly torn apart. The wormhole space was exposed in the crystal white trajectory. The next moment, one person and one dragon flapped their wings and flew into the wormhole space. The magic arrays at the entrance of the vortex cave behind them seemed unable to withstand the tearing of the magic tide, and were instantly annihilated. But the magic arrays were already useless, and List directly entered the wormhole space as an adult invisible dragon knight. The crystal white trajectory continued to operate, and everything in the wormhole space, big or small, appeared before his eyes. The huge and deep weave wrapped the wormhole space like a straw, but when List cast his gaze towards the deeper parts of the weave, his pupils suddenly dilated. He couldn't help but tremble from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 833. When the invisible dragon's power began to wane, unable to resist the repulsive force of the wormhole, it was forced to withdraw from the teleportation array and return to the entrance of the vortex in the real world. List was still panting heavily with lingering fear. The invisible dragon Bard beneath him was shivering, and it took a while for him to return to normal. "Brother." Ichi had been waiting at the entrance of the vortex. When the invisible dragon flew out, she immediately came over. Did the observation process go smoothly? List wiped the sweat from his forehead, indicating that Ichi should go back first. He remained silent on the way until they arrived at a hidden laboratory. Only then did he sort out the scene he saw in the wormhole. "Ichi, what do you think the essence of the weave is?" "It's probably the embodiment of a kind of magical law." "No." List shook his head solemnly, looking at Ichi as he slowly said, "You might not believe the essence of the weave. It's a dragon." "A dragon?" Ichi's eyes widened. "Yes, an inconceivable dragon. I can't describe its appearance. In fact, I didn't even see its entire body." List did his best to recall the scene in the depths of the weave that he had seen with the adult invisible dragon's white crystal trail in the spatial passage. It was an indescribable scene. It was like a net, but also like a field, slowly extending into the depths of the void. Within the white crystal trail was an existence that surpassed the structure of crystals and existed outside of matter. However, this outside of matter was not outside of the matter that the invisible dragon passed through. Outside of the invisible dragon's matter was probably some kind of special latitude, while the weave penetrated the entire latitude, only existing in a way that surpassed all cognition. However, this was not enough to make List exclaim in horror. Instead, in the depths of the weave, its existence once again surpassed all cognition. In the end, it formed an image that represented a dragon. "Brother, what kind of dragon is it?" The usually calm Ichi couldn't help but become anxious. "I can't find a concrete description, but it gives me the feeling that it's a dragon. Or if a dragon is an existence at the limit of magical power, such as the fire dragon representing the limit of flames, and the invisible dragon representing the limit of space, then this dragon that incarnated into the weave represents." List pondered for a long time, but still couldn't find the most accurate word to define it. In the end, he reluctantly used a word to explain: order. Order? That's right, it's order, or perhaps it's the rules of how the world operates, or perhaps it's magic power, matter and soul. No, I don't feel like it has a soul. It seems to be the source of matter and magic power. No, it should be said that it separates matter and magic power. Liszt followed his feelings and slowly explained the impact the weave had on him. It was a dragon, shapeless and formless. It was not even known if it really existed, but it was definitely revealed in the crystal white trajectory. The weave was an extension of its dragon magic that enveloped the entire world. It was a structure that was above matter and magic. Is this dragon still alive? Achi asked quickly. I don't know. I can only sense that it's a dragon, an abstract combination of matter and magic power. I can't sense its life aura or soul wave. Liszt shook his head. It was difficult to accurately describe the weave. But it's hard to say that it's dead. It's as if life or soul doesn't exist in it. He paused. Liszt added, just like humans don't have tails, the dragon that incarnated into the weave doesn't have life or soul attributes. It's just a collection of some kind of order and rules. At that moment he discussed with Achi for a long time about the dragon incarnated into the weave. However, apart from temporarily naming the dragon as the weave dragon, or simply the mystic dragon, they didn't discuss more about the mystic dragon. So the topic quickly shifted to the experiment itself. Using the invisible dragon to observe the nodes between matter and magic power, there was a lot to talk about. Throughout the night, Liszt elaborated on what he observed in the experiment. The discussion only ended when the sun rose in the east. Achi couldn't wait to take the notebook full of serpentines and return to Firewood Town's mage tower to organize the mages for the next step of research. Liszt also leisurely left the secret laboratory and returned to his temporary residence in Firewood Town to rest. Before going to bed he summoned the smoke mission. Mission completed. Reward: a profound understanding of the weave. Mission: the Whirlpool River residential area is the first stage of the development of the Flame Islands. Durut Red Apricot is leading a team to the north to establish a settlement. However, there are many prying eyes hidden in the forest. Why not investigate in depth? Reward: a large number of creatures of unknown races. So, the Weave Dragon mission is broken just like that? Looking at the new mission he was a little unwilling. He was in a stage of intense curiosity about the indescribable Weave Dragon. He originally thought that the smoke mission would do something about the mystic dragon, but he didn't expect that it would just be superficial. As soon as he saw the spots on the mystic dragon's body, he immediately changed his gaze. He wasn't interested in the content of the new mission and the reward of the creatures of unknown races. His thoughts were still on the mystic dragon. What did the mystic dragon represent? What was its relationship with this world? What was the relationship between the gemstone dragon, the metal dragon, and the holy dragon? Since the weave was formed by the mystic dragon, what was the relationship between the Moon Empire and the mystic dragon? What was the relationship between the mages and the mystic dragon? Apart from him, was there anyone else who had seen the mystic dragon, studied it, or even communicated with it? He even held on to his pounding heart and fantasized. The smoke mission noticed the mystic dragon. Will it start issuing chain missions related to the mystic dragon so that I can ride it one day? This thought was a little too bold. He still didn't know what the mystic dragon was. This world is stranger than I imagined. He tossed and turned on his bed until the sun was high up in the sky. Only then did he fall into a light sleep. In the midst of his drowsiness he had a dream. He dreamt that he had become a transparent person and was walking in a transparent river. He was muddle-headed and drifted with the flow. His surroundings were pitch black, but there were countless transparent people like him walking around. At this moment, a grotesquely shaped dragon claw tore through the darkness and tore towards the transparent river he was in. The darkness was forced back bit by the dragon claw, as if it wanted to grab him. He was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. However, at this moment, the transparent river was filled with mist, enveloping all the transparent people. But the indescribable dragon claw still tore through the darkness, then the mist, and directly crushed him. However, when the dragon claw quickly retreated from the mist and the darkness, a wave suddenly rolled up on the transparent river. He who had been crushed was now walking on the transparent river. Muddle-headed, he advanced forward into an unknown direction. He did not rest or retreat. Just like that he entered the unknown darkness. Phew! When he woke up from the dream, it was already sunset. Liszt couldn't remember what he had dreamed of, but he didn't really care. He vaguely dreamed of a river and a dragon claw. Perhaps the dragon claw was the mystic dragon's claw that he was thinking about. Chapter 834. Firefire Town was bustling with activity. 3 times a day, 30 large frame ships transported supplies, serfs, knights and craftsmen. Nearly 8,000 people had gathered in Starfire Plain, which was already comparable to the population of some small cities. When List had just infeft Flower Town, the town's population was only a little over 1,000. Vernal Inc. stepped towards a newly opened tavern in Firefire Town. Sir Viscount. Viscount Vernal. In the tavern, many knight without leather armor greeted him in half-baked serpentines. He responded in the same half-baked serpentines. The official language of Firefire Town was serpentines. The Great Dragon Knight Lord stipulated that the knight class must use serpentines as their daily language of communication. As for ordinary civilians, there was no requirement. They could speak serpentines or wind language. Vernal knew very well that the Lord was de-eagling, diluting the Eagle Kingdom label on the knight. However, he thought that this was superfluous because the knight had no loyalty to the Eagle Kingdom. They were only loyal to their lord. The lords of these knight had surrendered to the Great Dragon Knight List Flame Highness. A small number of lords paid the ransom and returned to their country, but they forgot their followers. Naturally, they could not get the loyalty of the knight. Therefore, most of the knight here yearned for the future kingdom of fire. To be able to obtain the status of a founding hero was certainly better than being mediocre before. Moreover, the glory of following the Great Dragon Knight was far greater than following an ordinary lord. Everyone knew that His Highness List was not only a dragon knight, but also had an archmage assisting him. The strength of the Kingdom of Fire was far greater than that of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire and was destined to dominate the Blue Sea. It was for this reason that Vernal eventually pledged his loyalty to List. After learning simple serpentines on Black Horse Island, he came to Firefire Town. As a Sky Knight, he led several night squads. Their main task was to hunt down the nearby World of Warcraft and ensure the safety of the serfs who cut down trees, occupied land and opened up wastelands. A glass of pure black beer. Vernal placed a few silver coins on the table. The tavern owner behind the bar immediately poured a large glass of black beer from the barrel and handed it to Vernal. Lord Viscount, please enjoy. Gulp, gulp. Vernal took a big gulp and felt the cold black beer enter his stomach. The tiredness of working in the forest all dissipated along with the beer. Awesome. Licking his lips, he added, "It's just too expensive." The tavern owner chuckled. This black beer is one of the few luxury goods in Inferno Town. Relying on the Great Lord and His Highness to transport it here, the cost is naturally very high. Also, we had to hire a few sorcerers to make crushed ice to cool it, which was another huge cost. Inferno Town was still not self-sufficient. All supplies depended on the supply of Black Horse Island. There was not much space on the frame ship for liquor, so each glass of beer was sold at a sky-high price. However, among the craftsmen who went to Inferno Town, there were winemakers who were already collecting wild fruits in the forest to make wine. After a while, the fruit wine would be available. Go away, don't talk to me about this. You are a black-hearted boss. Vernal did not want to listen to this. The tavern owner was not annoyed and continued to wipe the glass in his hand. He was an old man of Flower Town, which meant that he was the earliest subject of List. As List continued to develop, the status of these old people also rose. Many of them served as plantation stewards. Although they did not belong to the official ranks, they still had some power to manage the serfs of a plantation. The tavern owner did not want to continue farming, so he became a businessman. Finally, he followed List to Inferno Town and opened this tavern. Business was booming. Of course, the tavern also paid a lot of taxes. The reason why List allowed the existence of the tavern at a time when Inferno Town was short of living materials was to provide a place for the knight to relax and to recover the rewards given to the knight. He didn't care about the amount of money, he cared about whether the money could flow. Only when it flowed could money make money. If there was no place in Inferno Town to spend and provide enjoyment, no matter how much gold coins he gave to the knight would not be motivated. Giving them gold coins and then earning it back would not only motivate them, but in the end, the money would return to the hands of the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? Misers can't make a fortune. The glow of dusk spilled into the tavern through the window, and the noisy shouts of the knights soon became silent. Then all the knights stood up in a mess and bowed to the handsome figure who slowly walked in from the door. Even Vernal, the Viscount, stood up and followed all the knight in saluting, "Your Royal Highness. Continue with your business. Don't be too polite. I'm just here for a drink." The person who came in from the door was List, who had just woken up and was dressed casually. He was the master of the Flame Islands, the ruler of the Shell Sea, the future monarch of the Country of Fire, and the only ruler of Inferno Town. After the knight completed the ceremony, they took their seats, but the arrival of the Lord made them cautious and did not dare to make any noise. Vernal was also very nervous. Although Liszt was only 19 years old, his majestic temperament made him feel like he was treading on thin ice and trembling with fear. It must be known that the young man in front of him had personally killed a dragon knight in the Battle of Dragon Slaying. His fierce reputation was illustrious. Compared to Vernal's nervousness, the tavern owner was much more relaxed and greeted with a warm smile. "Your Royal Highness, you're here. Is it still your favorite wheat beer?" "Yes, a glass of iced wheat beer." Liszt sat down after the retainer knight wiped the bench. In the summer he would occasionally come to this tavern to drink some beer. The tavern owner opened the cabinet and took out a barrel from the innermost box. He carefully unscrewed the lid, poured a glass of wheat beer and respectfully handed it to Liszt. "Your Royal Highness, your wheat beer." Liszt took the glass and took a sip. A retainer knight had long since taken out a gold coin and placed it on the table. The price of wheat beer was very high because the raw materials and brewing process were the best. It was brewed according to the recipe specially bought from the Black Grass family of Beer Island. The cool wheat beer had a light bitterness and a good taste. Liszt liked this beer the most. If not for the fact that his space ring was filled with all kinds of more important supplies, he would definitely have brought a few barrels of wheat beer to ease the summer heat. Unfortunately, he only had 3 space rings and couldn't store such supplies, so he could only come to Inferno Town's tavern to satisfy his craving. Speaking of which, he had the invisible dragon, but he didn't get any more space gems. The reason was very simple. The condensation of space gems was different from that of ordinary gem deposits. It was directly condensed by the invisible dragon by consuming space magic. Perhaps this was the reason why it was a holy dragon and not a gem dragon. Liszt was too embarrassed to let the invisible dragon consume space magic to condense space gems. The growth of the invisible dragon was more important. Of course, the invisible dragon would take the initiative to consume space magic to condense space gems when it was at its peak. It wouldn't be too late to ask for space gems when Liszt prepared a smoke grass feast next time. Liszt put down the glass. Liszt turned to look at Vernal. "Viscount Vernal, is the work going well?" "It's going well, Your Highness," Vernal replied cautiously. "Relax, it's time to get off work. We are all members of the tavern who come to drink and have fun." Liszt smiled. The development of Inferno Island cannot be completed overnight. In the next few years, we will all be immersed in this vast forest. But when the crops in the fields mature, this island will become our most fertile home. Finished? Liszt raised his glass and gestured to Vernal and the knight in the tavern. "For a better tomorrow, for building our own home, cheers." Chapter 835. After drinking a glass of beer in the tavern and encouraging the knight to work hard, Liszt went to the mage tower to check on Achi's progress in the magic experiment. It was going well. Even though she didn't sleep for a night, Achi was still energetic. Mages were always energetic. She was designing a magic array that could tear the magic net. As long as she could tear the magic net, she could break the nodes in the material space and create a wormhole. Then she could break the node in another place and connect the wormhole to the node. Then she could complete the real magic teleportation array. "It's like opening a door, isn't it?" Liszt simply described Achi's description. If that's the case, this experiment will be called the Magic Door Project. Continue your research. If you need any help, just let me know. Bard and I will do our best to help you. Okay. Thank you, brother. After resting for a day, Liszt rode on the invisible dragon Bard and began to patrol the Whirlpool River. He planned to find the exploration team led by Durut Red Apricot and find out who was spying on them in the dark. He wanted to see what kind of unknown creature dared to spy on the exploration team. No matter if it was a wolf, tiger, monkey, snake, or anything else, they would be killed if they dared to obstruct the development of Fiery Island. With the invisible dragon Bard riding on him, the little fire dragon Leo appeared less frequently. In the future, Liszt's dragons would have a special division of labor. The light emerald dragon Ethan would stay in the dragon nest to produce ores, the fire dragon Leo would be responsible for fighting, and the invisible dragon Bard would be responsible for searching. The Crystal Trail's ability to detect magic power was better than any other method. Its ability to move around the boundary was even more powerful. Therefore, when Liszt and the dragon found the exploration team along the Whirlpool River, the knight, including Durut, did not find any trace of Liszt. Liszt did not expose himself either. He continued to circle in the sky and rode Bard above the forest from time to time to carefully detect the feedback of magic power. However, he did not find any signs of magic power gathering even after patrolling a large area of the forest around the exploration team. In other words, the spying probably did not belong to World of Warcraft. So, what are these unknown creatures? After dispersing the crystal trail and restoring his naked eyes, List patrolled again. Since there were creatures of unknown races spying on the pioneering team, they couldn't be far away. After searching for an entire hour, List finally found out what was spying on them in the dark. They were hiding in the dense forest and were as agile as monkeys. They could climb up the trees and step on the branches to observe the pioneering team from above. If List hadn't been alarmed by the movement above the canopy, he wouldn't have noticed it. But once they were discovered, these creatures without mana were not worth mentioning. It's actually a human, wearing beast skin and holding a bow and arrow. It seems like a primitive tribe living in the Flame Islands. List narrowed his eyes. He was both surprised and delighted. He was surprised that there were humans living on the Flame Archipelago, a remote island in the sea. Perhaps the humans from the legendary continent had accidentally drifted here and reproduced. What pleased them was the primitive tribe's humans. Although they looked ugly and backward, they were an excellent supplement for the serfs. A large number of serfs were needed to establish the blazing island. List was worried about where he could get so many serfs. He didn't expect that someone would send him a pillow when he was feeling sleepy. There were actually primitive tribes on the blazing island. According to the Smoke mission, there were a lot of primitive tribes humans. He looked at the primitive tribes humans wearing beast skin on the canopy and kept thinking, it seems that I need to change my strategy and capture these primitive tribes humans to serve me. Capturing serfs is indeed uncivilized, but compared to the serf trade, using the local aborigines may be less bloody. It was said that when the Europeans sold black slaves to the Americas, they were affected by navigation, hygiene, overloading, and so on. Basically, 10 black slaves died in order to transport one black slave to the Americas. The serf trade in this world was much better. Basically, out of 10 serfs, at most 2 or 3 would die in the transport. The serf trade that List took over had always been mainly about safety. Basically, out of 100 serfs, at most 1 would die. Protecting the lives of serfs was to protect the Lord's interests. He knew that the serf trade violated humanitarianism, but he couldn't give up the benefits. He could only take care of the serfs as much as possible. He asked for peace of mind. All the serfs who came to the Flame territory enjoyed a better living environment than before. But no matter how much peace of mind they had, it was impossible to cover up the casualties that occurred in the serf trade. He had never thought that there would be aborigines on Flame Island. Capturing these aborigines as serfs would eliminate the risks of the maritime trade and improve the living conditions of the aborigines at the same time. Whether it was hypocritical or benevolent, List quickly made a decision. He would capture all the aborigines on the island and then force them to accept serf transformation. They would welcome a better life and contribute to the modernization of Flame Island. Just at this time, the aborigines who were spying on the pioneering team climbed down from the canopy and quickly ran into the depths of the forest. List rode Bud and followed closely. After running for 10 kilometers, he found a large lake in the forest. There were many wooden houses scattered around the lake. These wooden houses were probably waterproof and moisture-proof, as they were all tall wooden houses. In the open space beside the lake, there were old people and children. The old people were wearing simple and crude linen, while the children were bare-bottomed. There were a few aborigines who were probably women. They were also wrapped in simple animal skins that covered their important parts, such as their private parts. They were cleaning the fur of beasts by the lake. The skin of these people was slightly dark, but not as dark as that of Africans. It was somewhat similar to the dark yellow skin of the Indians. From the structure of the wooden houses and the linen on the old people's bodies, it is easy to judge that this aboriginal tribe is slightly more advanced than those primitive tribes. Their ancestors probably brought some life skills with them when they were stranded on Flame Island, which were then inherited by their descendants. Knowing how to weave and build tall wooden houses showed that these aborigines were good candidates for serfs. With a little guidance, they could be sent to work in plantations or workshops. In the tallest wooden house in the tribe, the aborigines who had previously spied on them were talking to a few old people and a few burly men. List could only look inside from the window of the wooden house. But with just a glance, he noticed an interesting phenomenon. The old man in the middle was unexpectedly wearing black linen, and the design of the linen vaguely resembled a wizard's magic cloak. Magic cloak. List quickly cast magic eyes. Sure enough, there was a faint earthy yellow mana retroaction on the old man's body. In other words, he had cultivated The few old people around him also had faint lights on their bodies. There were cyan, red, and white colors, but the burly men had no magic power. List was very surprised. It looks like a wizard's cultivation system. Could it be that these aborigines are the descendants of wizards? Interesting, these primitive tribe aborigines actually know how to cultivate. No wonder they could survive in this forest of World of Warcraft. Thinking of this, he summoned the smoke mission. Chapter 836. A large number of native tribes. Very good. List was very satisfied with the mission reward. If the native tribes were at the level of this small tribe, then the more the better. They were the most suitable sources of serfs. In a flash, the serpentines formed by the smoke changed into a new serpentine. Mission: the discovery of the native tribes is undoubtedly good news. The natives with magic power are mysterious. Why not investigate the native tribes carefully, find out the origin of the native tribes' cultivation system, and figure out the current development of the native tribes? Reward: treasure of the native tribes. The native tribes actually have treasures. It seems that these native tribes really have an extraordinary origin. At that moment, he planned to rush over and capture the natives who seemed to be the leaders of the native tribes, then slowly interrogate them about the native tribes. But he quickly dismissed the idea. The reason was very simple. The natives were speaking in bird language that he couldn't understand, and he didn't have the patience to translate the native language word by word. It's more appropriate to mobilize a few orders of chivalry and a few mages to study the current situation of the native tribes. He suddenly rode on the invisible dragon Bard and left the native tribe. He flew directly toward the pioneering team. Durut Red Apricot's pioneering team not only had a large number of knights, but also many mages dispatched by the Guild of Magic. It was convenient for them to carry out this mission. Find Durut's location. List jumped off the back of the invisible dragon and released his firebird as he descended. The surging firebird swept through the entire pioneering team. The knight who was close to him clutched their throats as if they were being strangled by an invisible hand. Their chests were heavy and they couldn't breathe smoothly. Enemy attack. A knight endured the discomfort and roared loudly. A knight even drew out the long sword of the knight he carried with him, ready to line up to meet the enemy. Bang! While the orders of chivalry panicked, List landed steadily on the ground. When he stood up, he slowly withdrew his firebird and walked out of the dust. Durut, who was on high alert, saw a familiar figure slowly appear in the direction of the sound. It was a deep memory that he couldn't erase. The Fire Dragon Knight. List Tulip. Your Highness. Duarte could not believe it. I was the one who made orders of chivalry quiet down. List always liked this kind of sudden and flashy appearance, no matter how big of a commotion he caused. Since he was a dragon knight, he had to maintain the dignity of a dragon knight at all times. Duarte heaved a sigh of relief when he saw List's appearance. He immediately asked the knight beside him to calm the commotion. Then he got off his horse and bowed. I didn't know your highness was coming. I couldn't welcome you. I just came over to greet you. List gestured for Duterte to follow him to the tent. After entering the tent, he first asked the pioneering team about what happened during their voyage. It was nothing major. Even if there was a storm, the fleet could still safely pass through the storm and reach the mouth of the Whirlpool River because of the wind-calming divine pearl and the water-calming divine pearl provided by the territory. However, after arriving at the dense forest of the Whirlpool River, there were more problems. First of all, some serfs were not acclimatized to the climate, which made them sick and even die. Then there were more mosquitoes in the forest, which killed many serfs after being bitten by mosquitoes. Finally, the hot weather caused many serfs to suffer from heatstroke. The fleet brought a total of 2,000 serfs. After going back and forth, more than 500 serfs died. As for the knight with chi was very adaptable. Except for a few who died due to the World of Warcraft, the other knights still maintained their full fighting strength. It seems that I was a bit too hasty. The knight can adapt to the environment of Blazing Island, but the serfs can't. List shook his head. He felt somewhat uncomfortable. The serfs of the pioneering team lived and ate in the wild, which was full of dangers. They couldn't be compared to the serfs of Firewood Town. Your Highness, death is inevitable in pioneering. They came for the gold coins, so naturally they have to be prepared to die for the gold coins. Duarte didn't care at all. The dead serfs can be slowly replenished later. The priority is to develop Blazing Island and open up the living area of the Whirlpool River as soon as possible. The knight in this world was compassionate. However, there were almost no knight who truly had compassion for the serfs. The huge class gap made the nobles basically look down on the commoners. Their compassion was only directed towards the knight of the same class. Unless they were killed in a charge, the knight would not be killed under normal circumstances. After paying the ransom, they could still go back to being nobles. Hearing this, List said seriously, "Duarte, serfs are also people. You need to change your previous attitude. The Blazing Islands are in urgent need of development. Every serf is an important resource. In the future, the Knight of the Fire Nation will be born from the descendants of these serfs." Duarte nodded and said, "Your Highness, I understand. I will protect the serfs seriously." Although he said so, his expression still revealed his disapproval of the serfs. This was a deeply ingrained idea. It was difficult to change it without going through a revolution of blood and fire. List understood Duarte's mentality very well. In fact, he was also an aristocrat. If he really came up with the idea of, everyone is equal, he was afraid that even he himself would not be willing. "No, Duarte, you still don't understand. The serfs we brought from outside will breed enough knight to protect the Fire Nation in the future." Duarte didn't reply. List continued, "All serfs who come to the Blazing Islands to develop the wasteland will be granted the status of free people after the founding of the country. They will be given land to farm so that in the near future, they can strive to become knight families and become the backbone of the Fire Nation." "Your Highness, aren't you being too generous to the serfs?" Duarte asked carefully. "No, you will understand my plan after listening to me." List smiled slightly. "The reason why I have such an idea is very simple. Not long ago, I discovered a large number of Aboriginal tribes on Blazing Island. Their civilization is very backward and their skin is darker than ours." Aboriginal tribes. Duarte's eyes widened. "These Aboriginal tribes can be used as serfs to develop the Blazing Islands, can't they?" Duarte said excitedly, "Since there are a large number of Aboriginal tribes, it is obviously more cost-effective to capture them as serfs. Although the serfs we brought are of low status, after all, they have the same bloodline as us. They should not continue to be serfs. I finally understand your Highness' foresight." "It's good that you understand." List said faintly, "Immediately organize orders of chivalry and bring a few magicians to investigate the nearby Aboriginal tribes. I need to figure out the origin and development of these Aboriginal tribes. It would be best if I can master their language. But before figuring out the origin of the Aboriginal tribes, pay attention to secrecy." Chapter 837. Orders of Chivalry's method of investigating the native tribe was much more brutal than List had imagined. They acted directly at night, surrounded the native tribe, and then arrested everyone in the native tribe. What followed was a series of tedious interrogations. If they could not speak the native language, they would use sign language to communicate. After tirelessly trying, they finally began to understand the general situation of the native tribe. This was a small tribe of 186 people. Most of the natives did not have the talent for cultivation, so they fought and hunted like savages. The natives who had the talent for cultivation were protected by the tribe and sent to larger tribes to learn magic. The few old men who looked like tribal priests were all mages who had returned after learning. "Your Highness, these native tribes should be the inheritance left behind by ancient mages. Their spellcasting methods are very ancient and are very different from the current spellcasting methods." A mage explained to List, "Their methods of using magic runes are also very ancient. Times were developing and magic was constantly improving. Although the weave had shrunk, mages had improved many spellcasting methods to the extreme in order to reduce the consumption of magic power. The mages of the native tribe were still using spells that consumed a lot of magic power but had very little power. Therefore, the mages of the pioneer group deduced that it was the inheritance of ancient mages and had been preserved generation after generation on the isolated Flame Island. In the end, the mage even boldly deduced, "Your Highness, I have carefully recorded the pronunciation of the native language and found that their language is very likely to be the ancient language of the moon." Language of the moon? List raised his eyebrows and looked at the mage solemnly. The mage felt great pressure and could not help but add, "It's just an inference, Your Highness." He did not dare to guarantee that his discovery was correct. After all, the language of the moon had been lost. Because of the yearning for the era of the Moon Empire. Many mages would study the language of the moon and agree that although the language of the moon had been lost, it had been integrated into many languages of the legendary continent. Many words such as wind language and serpentine were related to the ancient language of the moon, but no one could guarantee what the language of the moon actually looked like. Then continue to study and try to completely understand the native tribe's language. I will send more mages from the Guild of Magic to help. In any case, the language of the natives must be studied so that it would be convenient to transform them into qualified serfs in the future. Of course, List hoped that the language of the Aborigines was the legendary language of the moon. Maybe the surviving descendants of the Moon Empire still had some information about the Moon Empire. It was said that magic was flourishing and sorcerers ruled the world. Who knew how many magnificent secrets were hidden in that era? The Temple of Fish and Clown in the Sea, the Emerald Dragon's hind leg on the Heart Island, the wreckage of the Fire Dragon on the Black Horse Island, the descendants of the Moon Empire on the Flame Island, and the Lost Sky Ship and the Sun's Child. Many unusual clues were mixed together. The power of fate represented by the Smoke Dragon behind the Smoke Mission seemed to be showing List an incredible past. In ancient times, what exactly happened in this sea? He couldn't be sure, but he guessed that a great war must have happened here. It was a war that would decide the direction of the world. The reason for the decline of the Sun's Child, the reason for the destruction of the Moon Empire, and the reason for the disappearance of the Holy Dragon could all be related to this war. Even a lion uses all its strength to capture a rabbit. For the investigation of the indigenous tribes, List maintained a cautious attitude. Apart from capturing all the members of the small tribe called Lake Corner, he did not expand the scale of the capture. Instead, he transferred another orders of chivalry and 10 sorcerers from Firewood Town to join the study of the indigenous tribes. After 10 days of research, they finally figured out everything about the indigenous tribes. The indigenous tribes called themselves the people who killed the moon, so List called them the people who killed the moon. As for why the people who killed the moon wanted to kill the moon, there was no way to find out. They called themselves that since they were born, and no one questioned why they wanted to kill the moon. The people who killed the moon were divided into large tribes and small tribes. Usually because there was not enough food in a certain forest, the small tribes were separated to the surrounding forests to make a living. The Lake Corner tribe was a small tribe that had just been separated. Most of them used to be called Shanjiao, living in the corner of a mountain range. The composition of the Lake Corner tribe was mainly divided into warriors and sorcerers. According to their language, sorcerers were people who used magic. Warriors were adult males. They were mainly responsible for hunting and gathering to provide food for the tribe. Sorcerers were the few old people. They mastered magic and used it to defend against the invasion of World of Warcraft. To make it easier to distinguish, List called them ancient sorcerers. Bend, fold, hook, and bend again. When the oldest ancient sorcerer, under the request of the researchers, wrote down the word sorcerer in their language. The sorcerers of the Guild of Magic who had studied the moon language collectively exclaimed in shock, "This is the moon language." In the moon language, sorcerer is written like this. They also took out a few magic books, which recorded many ancient words of the moon language. List took a look. Sure enough, the word sorcerer on the magic books was the same as the word sorcerer written by the ancient sorcerers of the Lake Corner tribe. Especially the curved structure, which had a very clear characteristic of the moon language, as if different moons were piled up together. The moon language was a complicated hieroglyph. It used the different numbers and shapes of the moons to express the changes of things. Because it was too abstract, modern sorcerers could not completely crack the moon language after thousands of years of research. No. The Lake Corner tribe used the moon language as a language to communicate. Without a doubt, they should be the descendants of the Moon Empire, who wandered to Flame Island to live and reproduce. It was a pity that the prosperous magic civilization of the Moon Empire was not inherited. The life of these indigenous tribes was not much different from that of the primitive people, far behind the night civilization. The remnants of the Moon Empire. List sighed. Then he increased the research on the Moon Killer, trying to uncover the mystery of the Moon Empire. However, the information that the Lake Corner tribe could provide was too little. This was only a very small Moon Killer tribe. There was only one ancient sorcerer in the tribe who could write the moon language and only a small part of it. This part of the moon language was about magic and did not involve daily life. Your Highness, we need more Moon Killer tribes for research. The sorcerers could not hold back their excitement and shouted to capture more Moon Killer tribes. Even a Chi, who was busy with magic experiments in the Inferno town, asked List several times about the Moon Killer tribes. Sorcerers had very complicated feelings about the Moon Empire. They yearned for the era when sorcerers ruled the world and put all the good things on the Moon Empire. But everyone knew that the Moon Empire was only one of the ancient human countries. With the development of the times, The understanding of the Moon Empire was probably beyond recognition. List was also curious. So he waved his hand, then Durut Red Apricot Cross Buckthorn get ready. Complete the capture of the superior Mountain Horn tribe of the Lake Horn tribe without alerting the larger tribes of the Moon Killer tribe. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.